The radio died at 21:47 hours. Not slowly, not with static or a gradual fade that might give warning or hope. It just stopped mid-sentence while Captain Torres was calling in the extraction timeline from Firebase Condor. Evangeline Thorne heard his last three words before silence swallowed everything. Hold until, then nothing. She pulled the handset away from her ear and stared at it like it had personally betrayed her, tapped it twice against her palm, pressed transmit. Condor, this is Raven Actual. Say again your last. Over. Dead air. Condor, Raven Actual requesting confirmation on extraction window. Over. Nothing. Specialist Casey Walker, 19 years old, both legs shattered below the knee, propped against a steel pylon with an IV bag taped to the railing above him, looked up at her with glassy eyes that reflected the pale green of her night vision equipment. Sarge, we still getting picked up? Eva clipped the handset back to her vest and forced a smile she didn't feel. The kind of smile combat medics learn to manufacture out of nothing but willpower and lies. Absolutely, just a signal issue. Fog's thick tonight. It wasn't a signal issue. She knew that. The clean cut of the transmission, the absence of even background hiss, the way the carrier wave had simply ceased to exist. Someone had jammed their frequency, someone close. Someone with military-grade electronic warfare equipment and the tactical knowledge to use it. Someone who wanted them isolated, trapped, and very aware of how alone they were on this bridge. Eva moved to the eastern edge of Ravenlock Bridge and looked down into the abyss. 60 feet below, the new river churned black and cold through the gorge. The water moved with a kind of violence that spoke to depths and currents that could swallow a man whole. The bridge was old steel truss construction, 2 lanes wide, built during the Korean War when American engineering meant overbuilding everything to last forever. It had been patched a dozen times since, ugly welds and replacement plates speaking to decades of deferred maintenance and tight budgets. It connected Fayette County to Raleigh County across the only passable terrain for 30 miles in either direction. Every other route involved mountain roads that wound through terrain where a single rock slide could close access for weeks. This bridge was the lifeline, the critical node, the irreplaceable link. Right now it was the only thing standing between her 4 wounded soldiers and whoever had just killed their communications. Thorne, the voice came from behind her, deep, strained, carrying the particular quality of pain that men try to hide and fail. Corporal Dalton Flint, 6'3", former offensive lineman from Alabama, now missing 3 fingers on his right hand and bleeding through a pressure bandage on his left shoulder. The hand injury was 40 minutes old, courtesy of shrapnel from the IED that had stopped their convoy. The shoulder wound was newer, maybe 20 minutes, from the sniper round that had found them during the initial scramble to secure the bridge. I heard movement on the west side, maybe 200 meters out. Eva didn't hesitate. She dropped to one knee and pulled her rifle scope to her eye. The AN/PVS 14 night vision monocular, mounted to her helmet, painted the far tree line in shades of pale green. Nothing visible in the immediate field of view, but Flint had infantry ears. 12 years in the Rangers before transferring to regular Army, 3 deployments to Afghanistan where listening meant living. If he said movement, there was movement. How many? Hard to say, more than a few. They're spacing themselves, trying to stay quiet. But there's enough of them that I can hear the cumulative noise. Eva lowered the scope and counted her assets with the cold precision of someone who'd been trained to calculate odds in fractions of seconds. 4 wounded soldiers. Walker couldn't walk. Both tibias shattered, bone fragments visible through the torn fabric of his uniform. She'd splinted what she could, administered morphine, and elevated his legs to slow the blood pooling in his tissues. But he needed a surgeon and an operating room, not a bridge deck and a prayer. Flint had one functional hand. The right one was wrapped in gauze, soaked through with blood, 3 fingers gone at the second knuckle, thumb and index remaining. He could grip, barely, but fine motor control was gone. The shoulder wound was through and through, clean entry and exit, but it had nicked something important. His range of motion was compromised and getting worse as the muscle stiffened. Sergeant Thomas Grady had taken shrapnel across his abdomen 40 minutes ago when the convoy hit the IED. Eva had treated him first, applying a chest seal over a sucking wound that whistled with every breath, packing the visible lacerations with hemostatic gauze, starting 2 IV lines. He was drifting in and out of consciousness now, his body shutting down non-essential systems to preserve the critical ones. Blood pressure falling, pulse climbing, skin going gray. And Eva herself. She carried an M4 carbine with 6 30-round magazines clipped to her vest, a Beretta M9 pistol with 3 15-round magazines, 2 M67 fragmentation grenades, 1 M18 smoke grenade, a K-bar combat knife that had been with her since basic underwater demolition / SEAL training 7 years ago. The handle worn smooth by thousands of hours of use, the blade still sharp enough to shave with. BUD/S. The thought came unbidden and she pushed it down fast. That was another life, another version of Evangeline Thorne, who'd existed in a different world with different rules. That woman had died 3 years ago in Ramadi. What remained was someone else entirely. "Flint, can you hold a weapon?" He looked at his mangled right hand. The gauze was dark with blood, the remaining fingers swollen. Then he picked up his M4 with his left hand and worked the charging handle one-handed, the motion awkward but functional. "I can pull a trigger, Sarge. That's all I need." "Good. Set up on the eastern pylon. Anything comes from the tree line on the west side, you call it before you shoot. Understood?" "Roger that." He moved slowly, painfully, favoring his left shoulder where the bullet had punched through. Each step was measured, deliberate, the movement of a man who knew his body was failing but refused to acknowledge it. But he moved. That was what mattered. As long as they could move, they could fight. As long as they could fight, they could survive. Eva turned to Walker. The kid was shaking. Not from cold, though the October Appalachian air was bitter enough to frost breath. He was shaking because he was 19 and both his legs were destroyed, and he could hear the same noises Flint heard. The sounds of armed men moving through fog toward people who couldn't run. The specific rustling that came from tactical gear, the soft clink of metal on metal, the whisper of boots on gravel. "Walker, look at me." He did. His pupils were dilated despite the morphine. Shock was settling in, the body's autonomic response to catastrophic injury. His skin was clammy, his breathing rapid and shallow. Classic signs of compensation, the moment before the system started to fail. "You're going to be fine, you hear me? I've kept people alive through worse than this." "Worse than this?" His voice cracked on the last word. She almost laughed. Almost. Because the truth was complicated and terrifying, and entirely dependent on how you define survival. "Yeah, kid, way worse. Now I need you to do something for me. Can you still use your arms?" "Yes, Sarge." "Good. I'm going to put an M4 next to you. You don't touch it unless I say so. But if I say so, you aim at the widest part of whatever I'm pointing at, and you squeeze. Not jerk, not yank, just steady pressure until the weapon fires. Can you do that?" Walker swallowed hard. His Adam's apple bobbed in his thin neck, the tendons standing out like cables. "I've never shot at a person before." "Neither have I," Eva said. It was the first lie she told that night. It wouldn't be the last. She moved back to the western edge of the bridge. The fog was thickening, rolling up from the gorge in slow, heavy curtains that smelled like wet iron and rotting leaves. Somewhere in that fog were men with weapons who wanted this bridge. Men who'd planned this ambush with the kind of precision that spoke to military training, inside information, and detailed intelligence about convoy schedules. Then the loudspeaker crackled to life. Not their radio, something external. A PA system maybe vehicle-mounted, the audio quality too good for anything handheld. It was broadcasting from somewhere in the western tree line, the sound bouncing off the steel trusses and amplifying in strange ways. "Attention, American soldiers on Ravenlock Bridge." The voice was calm, almost polite. It had the cadence of someone reading from a script, practiced, measured, without emotion. The kind of voice that psychological operations specialists spend months perfecting. "We know your radio is down. We know your convoy has departed. We know you have wounded personnel who cannot be moved." Eva's jaw tightened. They did know everything, which meant intelligence, observation, probably drone surveillance. This wasn't a random militia attack. This was planned, coordinated, professional. "We are offering you a single opportunity. Leave your weapons on the bridge. Walk east. No one will follow you. No one will be harmed." Flint looked at her from 20 feet away. His eyes said what his mouth didn't. They know everything. Position, strength, status, limitations. "We're compromised before we even start." "You are a medical unit," the voice continued. "We have no quarrel with medics. Medics don't fight." The loudspeaker clicked off. Silence returned, heavier now, loaded with the weight of what had just been said and what it implied. Someone had done their homework. Someone knew exactly who was on this bridge and what they were capable of. Or more accurately, what they thought this unit was capable of. Walker's voice trembled from behind her. "Sarge, maybe we should—" "No." "But they said what they wanted us to hear. That's called psychological operations, Walker. And the fact that they're using it means they don't want to fight. You know what that tells me?" "What?" "They're scared of what's on this bridge." She said it with more confidence than she felt. But confidence was currency right now, and she was spending everything she had. The truth was more complicated and more dangerous. She knew exactly what this was. A well-organized militia force, probably 30 to 40 fighters based on the communication sophistication and the electronic warfare capability, trying to seize this bridge, control the crossing, control the movement corridor through the only viable route for 30 miles. Classic territorial denial. The kind of operation that required planning, resources, and command structure. And they expected a medical unit to fold. Why wouldn't they? 4 wounded soldiers and 1 medic against 40 trained fighters? The math was simple and brutal. Eva looked down at her uniform, the medic patch on her shoulder, red cross on white background, the caduceus on her helmet, the aid bag strapped to her thigh. Everything about her screamed non-combatant. Geneva Convention protections. Don't shoot the medic. Don't shoot the person trying to save lives. But underneath the medic vest, pressed flat against her chest plate, where no one could see it, was a badge most people in this unit had never known existed. Expert sniper qualification. Naval Special Warfare. She'd earned it 7 years ago in a life that felt like someone else's dream. Or nightmare. The line between the two had blurred somewhere along the way. 3 deployments, 214 confirmed engagements. A service record that was still classified in 3 different databases. A nickname whispered in intelligence briefings across 3 continents, spoken with a kind of reverence people reserve for legends and myths. The ghost of Ramadi. Eva closed her eyes for 2 seconds and saw the face she always saw when that name surfaced. A boy, maybe 8 years old. Dark hair, dark eyes, small for his age. Standing behind an insurgent commander she'd been tracking for 6 weeks through the streets of Ramadi during the surge operations of 2007. The commander was high value, responsible for coordinating IED networks that had killed 17 Americans and wounded 43 more. He was careful, paranoid, rarely exposed himself to observation. When he finally made a mistake, Eva had been waiting. Her .300 Winchester Magnum round had passed through the commander's chest at 847 meters. A clean kill, textbook penetration, high thoracic cavity, catastrophic hemorrhage, instant incapacitation. The kind of shot that sniper instructors used as teaching examples. The round had continued into the child standing 4 feet behind him. The boy had been holding the commander's hand. His son, intelligence later confirmed, brought to the meeting as a gesture of trust, a human shield against American treachery, a statement that said, "I am so confident in this location that I bring my child." The boy died before he hit the ground. The commander died a hero to his cause, martyr to the resistance, symbol of American brutality. And Evangeline Thorne died too. Not physically, but in every way that mattered. She left special warfare the next month, retrained as a combat medic, swore an oath over that child's grave, a grave she'd never actually seen, but carried in her mind with perfect clarity. She would never take another life, not for mission, not for country, not for anything. Every bullet she'd fired since then, in training, in qualification, in the endless rehearsals that combat armed soldiers live through, she aimed low. Legs, shoulders, mobility kills, weapon disarmament, suppressive fire that forced enemies to ground without killing them. She would stop threats. She would not create ghosts. But tonight wasn't about philosophy. Tonight was about 4 Americans who were going to bleed out on this bridge if she didn't hold it until dawn. Eva checked her watch. 2,156 hours. Dawn was at 0618, 7 hours, 22 minutes. She had 6 magazines, 4 casualties, 0 communication, and 30 to 40 enemy fighters in the fog. Thorne, it was Grady. His voice was wet, each word costing him visible effort. The chest seal was holding, but barely, air leaking around the edges, his lungs struggling to expand against the pressure of blood in the chest cavity. He was lying on a litter 10 feet behind her, and somehow, even half dead, he'd heard everything. "Grady, you need to stay still. Every time you move, you risk tearing that seal loose." "I heard the loudspeaker. I know. They're going to assault this bridge." "Probably." He was quiet for a moment, his breathing rattled, wet and labored. Then, with effort that made his face contort, he spoke again. "You're not going to leave." It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact from a man who'd spent 20 years in uniform and knew how to read people. "No, Sergeant, I'm not. 4 wounded, 1 medic, no comms, no backup for 7 hours. He coughed, a thick, wet sound that Eva's medical training screamed was blood in the airway. "Bad odds. I've had worse." Grady stared at her through eyes that were starting to lose focus. Really stared, like he was seeing something beneath the medic vest and the gentle hands that had applied his chest seal and started his IVs. "Who the hell are you, Thorne?" She didn't answer. Instead, she pulled her rifle tight against her shoulder and settled into a shooting position she hadn't used in 3 years. Prone, stock welded to cheek, breathing slowed to 4 cycles per minute, the rhythm so ingrained it happened without conscious thought. Left hand supporting the forend, right hand on the pistol grip, trigger finger indexed along the receiver until the moment of commitment. The scope painted the tree line in shades of green, and she waited. The first probe came at 22:31 hours. 3 men moving in a loose wedge formation along the western approach road. They were quiet, using proper noise discipline, avoiding the gravel and keeping to the grass verge where their footfalls would be muffled. No talking, no flashlights, but they were visible through the night optic, clear as daylight, their body heat signatures bright against the cool October air. 2 carried rifles, AK pattern weapons from the silhouettes. The third had a handheld radio and what looked like a pair of wire cutters attached to his belt. Communications team. They were going to try to tap or cut the bridge's landline junction box mounted on the western support tower, compromise any backup communications, ensure complete isolation. Eva tracked them through her scope. The point man was moving with confidence. Too much confidence. He thought the bridge was undefended, or defended by medics who wouldn't shoot, or defended by soldiers too wounded to matter. She let them close. 80 meters, 70, 60. At 50 meters, the point man stopped. He raised a closed fist, the universal infantry signal for halt. The other two froze. He was looking at something on the ground. Eva shifted her scope and saw what had caught his attention. A thin wire she'd strung across the road at ankle height 20 minutes ago, connected to an empty IV bag filled with loose gravel and a handful of ball bearings. A noise trap, the kind of improvised early warning system that special operations soldiers learned to make out of whatever materials were available. And he'd spotted it. Smart. These weren't amateurs playing militia. These were trained fighters with infantry experience. The point man knelt and carefully disconnected the wire, following it with his fingers to find both anchor points, ensuring there wasn't a secondary trigger. Then he waved his team forward with a hand signal that Eva recognized from a dozen different armies. All clear. Move up. Eva put her crosshairs on the radio in the third man's hand. Not on his hand, not on his body, on the radio itself. 4 inches of plastic and circuit boards and batteries worth maybe $200, but worth infinitely more right now because it represented coordination, command and control, the ability to mass forces at decisive points. One shot, the radio exploded into fragments. Plastic shards, lithium battery components, shattered LCD screen. The man screamed and clutched his hand. Not destroyed, but lacerated. Blood running between his fingers, the shock and pain enough to compromise his combat effectiveness. The other two dropped flat instantly, proper react-to-contact drill, getting small and seeking cover. The point man rolled left into the grass verge, searching for the muzzle flash that would tell him where the shooter was positioned. Eva had already shifted position. She was 15 feet from where she'd fired, moving along the deck in a low crawl that kept her profile below the bridge railing. A technique drilled into her during sniper school at Fort Benning and refined through 3 deployments. Shoot and move, always. Never fire twice from the same position. Make them guess. Make them uncertain. Turn their numerical advantage into a psychological disadvantage. Contact west, Flint called from his position. His voice was steady despite the pain. I see them. 2 prone, 1 wounded. Hold fire, Eva ordered. Let them pull back. The point man was shouting now, not at her, at his wounded teammate. Commands in English with a southern accent. Probably local militia rather than foreign fighters. Move! God damn it, move back now! Johnson, help him! Go, go, go! They scrambled. The 2 able-bodied fighters grabbed their injured comrade under the arms and dragged him back toward the tree line in a proper casualty evacuation drill. In 30 seconds they were gone, swallowed by the fog and darkness. Eva exhaled slowly, deliberately, letting the adrenaline dissipate without shaking. 1 round expended, 179 remaining. 1 enemy radio destroyed, 1 message sent. This bridge has teeth. Sarge. Walker's voice was steadier now. The morphine was working, taking the edge off the pain, letting him think clearly. That was, you shot the radio out of his hand. I shot the radio. His hand happened to be holding it. From 50 meters, at night, in fog. Eva didn't respond. She was already repositioning to cover the northern approach, a narrow trail that wound down from the ridge above the bridge. The kind of terrain that looked impassable on a map, but that determined infantry could negotiate with time and patience. Sarge, who trained you to shoot like that? The United States Navy. Walker was quiet for a long time after that. 20 minutes passed, then 30. The fog pulsed and shifted like a living thing, revealing and concealing the tree line in random intervals. Eva used the time to inventory their situation with brutal honesty. Water. 6 canteens, maybe 2 liters total. Enough for 12 hours if they rationed. Medical supplies. Mostly expended, 2 bandages remaining, 1 tourniquet. No more hemostatic gauze. 1 IV bag. Basic tools only. Ammunition, 179 rounds 5.56 millimeters, 45 rounds 9 millimeters. Adequate for defensive operations if she was precise. Inadequate for sustained engagement. Time, 6 hours 52 minutes until dawn. Casualties, deteriorating. Grady's lung was filling with blood. Flint's blood pressure was dropping. Walker was stable but immobilized. All 3 needed surgical intervention within hours, not days. Reinforcements, unknown. The convoy had departed before the ambush. They knew something was wrong, but not the specifics. Best case, they'd send a reaction force at first light. Worst case, they'd assume the unit was destroyed and wait for intelligence before committing more assets. Eva was running probability calculations when the loudspeaker returned at 23:08 hours. Interesting, the medic has a rifle. Eva's blood went cold. They were recalibrating, adjusting their assessment based on observation. That radio shot had told them something they hadn't known before. We have new terms. Surrender the bridge intact. We guarantee medical treatment for your wounded. You have 5 minutes to comply. Flint called over to her, his voice low and urgent. They're stalling, buying time to reposition. That probe was reconnaissance, not assault. They're gathering information about our defensive posture. I know. What do we do? Eva looked at her watch. 6 hours, 47 minutes until dawn. She made a decision that would define the rest of the night. She crawled to the center of the bridge, her body low against the deck, and found the maintenance access hatch. A steel plate, maybe 3 feet square, covering access to the internal support structure. She'd noticed it during the initial defensive setup and filed it away the way snipers file away everything as a potential tool or asset. She pulled the plate open with her K-bar, levering it up against corroded bolts that hadn't been moved in years. Beneath the hatch, the bridge's internal anatomy was visible. Massive steel I-beams running the full width of the span, bolted to cross members that were, in several places, visibly corroded. Decades of water damage, freeze-thaw cycles, road salt eating away at the metal, the kind of maintenance backlog that state DOT engineers lost sleep over. She found what she was looking for. A repair plate bolted over a section where the original steel had been replaced 20 years ago. The bolts were rusted. The plate was thin, maybe half the thickness of the original beams. A weak point, a potential failure mode. She pulled both M67 fragmentation grenades from her vest. Each one weighed 14 ounces, packed with Composition B explosive and a coiled wire fragmentation sleeve designed to create thousands of high-velocity projectiles. "Thorne!" Grady's voice again, strained, confused, fighting through the pain and blood loss to understand what he was seeing. "What are you doing?" Making a decision. "Those are frags." "Yes, they are." "You're going to blow the bridge." "I'm going to blow part of it, the western third. It'll create a gap too wide to cross on foot. That cuts off their direct assault route and forces them to attempt more complicated approaches that I can interdict. That's the idea. It also cuts off our retreat." Eva looked at him. His face was gray in the darkness, skin waxy with shock, lips tinged blue from poor oxygenation. His breathing was becoming more labored despite the chest seal. "We weren't retreating anyway, Sergeant." She rigged both grenades beneath the corroded repair plate, using medical tape and paracord for a remote pull mechanism. The setup was crude but functional. Pull the cord, pins release, 4-second fuse, detonation. The grenades would channel most of their blast energy against the weakened repair plate, and the plate would fail, and 40 feet of bridge span would drop into the gorge. Then she crawled back to her firing position and waited. The 5-minute deadline expired at 23:13 hours. The loudspeaker didn't come back. Instead, at 2319 hours, Headlights appeared on the western road. Two vehicles moving fast, maybe 40 miles per hour. Technical trucks. Eva recognized the silhouettes through her scope immediately. Civilian pickup trucks with welded weapon mounts, the kind of improvised fighting vehicle that insurgents had been using since the Toyota War in Chad during the 1980s. The lead truck carried an M2 Browning heavy machine gun on a ring mount. The second had a mortar tube, probably 60 millimeters, strapped to its bed along with stacked ammunition crates. They were done talking, done negotiating, done with psychological operations. They were bringing violence. Flint, two technicals approaching from the west, heavy weapons, M2 and mortar. I see them. What's the play? Wait for them to reach the bridge approach. Once they're committed to the crossing, I blow the gap. And if they stop short, then we have a much longer night and I've wasted 2 grenades. The trucks rolled forward. 100 meters, 80, 60. The engines were loud in the night air, unmuffled diesel, the sound echoing off the gorge walls. They stopped at 40 meters, just at the edge of the western approach ramp where intact asphalt met the bridge deck. Men dismounted. Eva counted through her scope, her brain automatically cataloging targets, threats, priorities. 8 from the lead truck, 6 from the second, all armed with rifles, all moving with practiced coordination, spreading out into a skirmish line, establishing fields of fire. One of them began setting up the M2 on a tripod position overlooking the bridge. Another man was connecting the ammunition belt, 100-round length of linked .50 caliber BMG rounds that could turn a human body into pulp at this range. Flint, that M2 gets operational, we're dead. It'll punch right through these pylons. I need to blow it now. Do it. Eva grabbed the paracord. Her hand was steady. 3 years of medical training, 3 years of swearing never to take aggressive action again. 3 years of building a new identity as someone who saved lives instead of ending them. She thought about the boy in Ramadi, about the promise she'd made. Then she pulled. The explosion was enormous. 2 M67 grenades detonating simultaneously against corroded steel created a blast that exceeded her calculations. The repair plate didn't just fail, it disintegrated. The weakened I-beams around it, already compromised by decades of corrosion, sheared along fracture lines that propagated faster than sound. Secondary failures cascaded through the structure as load-bearing members suddenly found themselves carrying forces they weren't designed for. A 40-foot section of the western span tore itself apart. Steel screamed, concrete disintegrated, rebar twisted. The entire bridge shuddered like a wounded animal. The vibration transmitted through the structure so violently that Eva's teeth rattled. Debris rained down into the gorge below. Chunks of concrete, sections of railing, fragments of roadway, all of it falling 60 feet to the black water, disappearing with splashes that were lost in the echoing roar of structural failure. When the dust cleared and the ringing in Eva's ears subsided enough to hear, there was a gap, 40 feet of empty space between her position and the western approach. No vehicle could cross it. No infantry could jump it. The bridge was cut, severed, impassable. The M2 team scrambled backward, abandoning their weapon setup. The mortar crew dropped their equipment and ran. Shouts erupted from the tree line, confused, angry, disbelieving. The sound of men whose plan had just been destroyed by an action they hadn't anticipated. Eva looked at the gap she'd created and felt something she hadn't expected. Relief. Because now, for the first time tonight, the math worked. They couldn't reach her by ground assault, and she hadn't had to shoot anyone to stop them. Grady laughed from his litter, a painful, gurgling laugh that turned into a coughing fit that brought up blood. He spat to the side and spoke through cracked lips. "You crazy. You actually blew the bridge." "Part of it. You know what that means, right? When the engineers see this, they're going to..." "I'll deal with the engineers. Right now I'm dealing with the 40 guys who want to kill us." Flint called out from his position. They're pulling back. The trucks. Repositioning. Moving to standoff range. They'll try the mortar from distance, Eva said, thinking through the tactical problem. They don't need to cross if they can drop indirect fire on us. Can they hit us? Not accurately, not in this fog, but they'll try. She was right. At 2,341 hours, the first mortar round arced over the gorge and struck the roadway 60 meters east of their position. The explosion lit up the fog like a camera flash. Bright, brief, terrifying. The pressure wave rolled over them, not dangerous at this range, but loud enough to make Walker scream. "Short!" Eva called, her voice cutting through the ringing aftermath. "They're walking it in. Everyone get behind the pylons. Now!" The second round landed 40 meters east. The third, 25. Each explosion closer. Each one bracketing their position with the methodical precision of experienced mortar crews who knew their weapons and their math. Eva grabbed Grady's litter and dragged it behind the thickest pylon she could reach. Flint pulled Walker to cover, his one good hand locked around the kid's wrist. Eva threw herself over Grady's body and used her own as a shield, her chest plate absorbing fragments that would have torn through his unprotected torso. The fourth round exploded 15 meters away, close enough to spray them with gravel and steel fragments, close enough for the pressure wave to compress Eva's chest against Grady's body, driving the air from her lungs. Eva's ears were ringing. Blood trickled from her left nostril, the characteristic nosebleed that came from overpressure exposure. But the fifth round never came. She waited. 10 seconds, 20, 30, counting, listening, analyzing, silence. "They're out," she whispered. They didn't bring enough rounds for sustained fire. Probably only brought what they could carry, didn't plan for a siege. She rolled off Grady's litter. He was staring at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Shock, gratitude, something else. "You covered me," he said. "You're my patient. You used yourself as a shield." Standard procedure for protecting casualties during indirect fire. "No, it isn't, Thorne. Not even close. That's getting a Medal of Honor. That's not standard procedure." Eva wiped the blood from her nose and checked his chest seal. Still intact, remarkably. His pulse was thready but present, maybe 90 beats per minute. Too fast. His body was fighting, compensating, struggling. "How much time?" he asked. She checked her watch. 2,358 hours. 6 hours, 20 minutes until dawn. "Enough time, Sergeant. Just hold on." The bridge was cut. The mortars were spent. The enemy was regrouping, reassessing, planning their next move. And Evangeline Thorne, the medic who didn't fight, had just survived the opening round of what was going to be the longest night of her life. She checked her remaining ammunition. 177 rounds remaining for the M4, 45 for the Beretta, 0 grenades. The math was getting tighter. She looked east into the fog-covered mountains where dawn would eventually rise. 6 hours, 4 wounded, 1 bridge, and an unknown number of fighters who were just learning the first lesson of the night. The most dangerous person on this bridge wasn't the one with the biggest gun. It was the one who knew exactly where every bullet would go and chose, with every single shot, not to kill. The mortar smoke still hung in the air when the loudspeaker returned, but this time the voice was different. Not the calm, scripted psychological operations tone from before. This one was harder, older. It carried decades of command authority and the particular edge that came from men who'd fought too many wars and buried too many soldiers. "This is Colonel Vance Kessler, Sovereign Patriot Brigade." Eva's stomach dropped. Every soldier who'd served in Iraq during the surge knew that name. Kessler had been a legend at Fort Bragg before he'd become a cautionary tale. Decorated battalion commander, Silver Star, 2 Bronze Stars with V device. A man who'd led from the front and brought his soldiers home alive more often than not. Then something had changed. The territorial disputes of 2019, the fracturing of military unity along political lines, the growing divide between federal authority and state sovereignty. Kessler had walked away from Fort Bragg with 200 men, taking their training, their experience, their loyalty to him personally, rather than to the uniform they'd sworn to serve. He was smart, ruthless, professional, and he'd never lost a tactical engagement. "I know you blew my bridge," Kessler continued. His voice had a southern drawl softened by years of command, the accent of Georgia or Alabama, or one of the other states that produced more soldiers per capita than anywhere else. "Creative, I'll give you that, but you've made a mistake. You think that gap protects you?" He let the question hang. "It doesn't. It traps you." Eva's grip tightened on her rifle until her knuckles ached. "I have 43 men. You have 4 wounded and 1 nurse." The word nurse hit like a slap. Dismissive, belittling. The exact tone Eva had heard throughout her entire military career, from men who thought that medical personnel weren't real soldiers, weren't real warriors, were somehow lesser because they'd chosen to save lives instead of take them. "I have heavy weapons, climbing teams, all the time in the world. You have what? 5 magazines? 6? He knew. Somehow he knew her ammunition count. Had one of the probe teams gotten close enough to observe? Did they have thermal optics that had counted her magazine pouches? Did they have a spotter she hadn't detected? "Here's what's going to happen. My climbing team will reach your side in about 45 minutes. When they do, they'll establish a firing position on the ridge above you. Then my mortar team, which is currently resupplying from our reserve stocks, will begin sustained fire on your position while my climbers descend to the bridge." He paused for effect. "You can't cover both threats simultaneously. You're one person, and when my men reach that bridge, they will take it. The question isn't whether, it's whether you're wounded or corpse when it happens." The loudspeaker clicked off. Silence settled over the bridge like a burial shroud. Then Walker spoke, his voice small and young and terrified in a way that made Eva's chest ache. "Sarge, he knows everything. He knows how many magazines we have. He knows our positions. He knows we can't retreat. He knows everything." "Not everything. He knows how many magazines you have. He thinks he knows. There's a difference between intelligence and certainty. He's guessing, making assumptions based on doctrine and standard loadouts. He doesn't know for certain." "What doesn't he know?" Eva looked at Walker. At this 19-year-old kid from Ohio with 2 shattered legs and eyes that were begging for something to hold on to. Something that would make the next 6 hours survivable. She made a choice, a dangerous one. But these soldiers deserve the truth, or at least enough of it to keep fighting. "He doesn't know who I am." "You're a medic." Before that, Flint's head turned. Grady went still on his litter, despite the pain that had to be consuming him. Eva reached beneath her medic vest, her fingers finding the badge she'd hidden there for 3 years. Pressed flat against her chest plate where no one would see it, where she could pretend it didn't exist, where she could build a new identity over the old one, like scar tissue covering a wound. She pulled it out and held it up in the pale green glow of the night vision equipment. The eagle and trident of naval special warfare gleamed dully. Below it, the expert sniper qualification bar. Both of them earned through years of training that broke most candidates, deployments that tested every limit, operations that remained classified in databases she'd never be allowed to access again. Walker stared. That's a SEAL badge." "Trident," Flint corrected, his voice barely above a whisper. "That's a SEAL trident." "Jesus Christ, Thorne, you're a SEAL?" "Was, past tense. I transferred to medical 3 years ago." 3 deployments, Eva said quietly. 214 engagements. "I was a sniper with DevGru before I left the teams." Nobody spoke. The only sounds were Grady's labored breathing and the distant engine noise from the tree line where Kessler's forces were regrouping. The reason I'm telling you this isn't because it changes our tactical situation. We're still outnumbered, outgunned, trapped on a broken bridge with no communications and no reinforcements for 6 hours. But Colonel Kessler out there is planning his assault based on faulty intelligence. He thinks he's facing a medical unit that got lucky with one good shot, a combat support element that's in over its head. She slid the trident back under her vest, hiding it again, hiding what it represented, hiding who she'd been. He's wrong, and that's the only advantage we have. Grady broke the silence first. His voice was rough, each word scratched out through damaged lungs and failing strength. The ghost of Ramadi. Eva flinched, actually flinched, a physical reaction she couldn't control, her body responding to the name before her mind could suppress it. I heard the stories, Grady continued, fighting through pain to speak. Everybody did, before I left Delta. A SEAL sniper who could hit targets at ranges that shouldn't be possible. 1,200 meters, 1,500. Shots that defied ballistics models. They said she disappeared, left the teams. Nobody knew why. His eyes found hers in the darkness. Now I know why. Eva's face went hard. Not now, Sergeant. Fair enough. Grady shifted on his litter and groaned, the sound torn from deep in his chest. So what's the play, Ghost? Don't call me that. What's the play, Thorne? Eva was already moving, her mind transitioning from the emotional weight of revealing her past to the tactical problem of surviving the immediate future. She crawled along the eastern span, checking sight lines, measuring distances with the unconscious precision of someone who'd spent a decade calculating ballistic trajectories in her sleep. Kessler's right about one thing. I can't cover both the ridge and the bridge simultaneously. When his climbing team reaches the ridge line, they'll have an elevated firing position that negates most of my advantages. Height dominates everything in combat. So we stop them before they get there, Flint said. With what? We can't see the gorge wall from up here. The angle is wrong. The bridge deck blocks our line of sight to anything below the rim. Then we change the angle. Flint pointed down with his good hand. The maintenance walkway. On the underside of the bridge, I saw it when we first set up. Runs along the southern edge, suspended below the road surface. Maybe 15 feet down. From there you'd have a clear line of sight into the gorge, see the climbers as they come up. Eva processed this in 2 seconds. He was right. The maintenance catwalk would give her a downward angle into the gorge, let her see the climbers before they reach the top. But it would also leave her completely exposed to fire from the western side. She'd be hanging below the deck with nothing but air and 60 feet of empty space beneath her. If I go down there, I can't cover the western approach. I'll be focused entirely on the gorge. I'll cover it. You have one hand, Flint, and a shoulder wound that's compromising your range of motion. I have one hand, a rifle, and a really good reason to stay alive. He paused. When he spoke again, his voice cracked slightly. My daughter turns 3 next month. I already bought the cake topper, little plastic horse because she's obsessed with horses. Never met a real one, just seen them on TV, but she's convinced that horses are the best thing in the world. He looked at Eva directly. Her name is Lily, and she sleeps with a stuffed horse named Mr. Trotters. When I FaceTime her from deployment, she puts the phone up to the horse's ear so I can say goodnight to both of them. Every single time. Like it's the most important thing in the world. Eva felt something crack inside her chest. Not a physical thing, something deeper. The kind of fracture that happens when someone else's courage makes you recognize your own fear. I'm not missing her birthday, Thorne. I'm not missing the chance to say goodnight to Mr. Trotters. So you go handle the climbers. I've got the West. Eva nodded once, not trusting herself to speak. Walker. Yeah, Sarge? You're Flint's spotter. You watch the western tree line and call out anything that moves. Numbers, direction, distance, descriptions. Can you do that? Yes, Sarge. Grady. Silence. Then, so faint she almost missed it. Still here, Eva crawled to him, checked his pulse at the carotid. Barely there. A fading flutter like a bird with broken wings. His skin was cold. His lips were blue. The chest seal was leaking air around the edges, the adhesive failing as blood and condensation compromised the seal. "Stay awake, that's an order." 47 minutes, Sergeant." His eyes opened, unfocused, drifting. "That's all I need from you." Eva grabbed her rifle and moved to the southern edge of the bridge. The maintenance access ladder was a rusted steel affair bolted to the outer rail, maybe 18 inches wide, descending into darkness. It looked like it hadn't been maintained since the bridge was built. The metal corroded and flaking, bolts weeping rust stains. Eva swung her legs over the rail and started down. The catwalk was narrow, 18 inches of steel grating suspended beneath the bridge deck by corroded brackets that groaned with each step. Every footfall produced a metallic protest that seemed impossibly loud in the night air. The gorge opened below her, 60 feet of nothing between her boots and the black water. She found a position where two support beams created a natural rest for her rifle. From here she could see the gorge wall, the switchback trail that descended from the ridgeline, the exposed rock face that climbers would need to negotiate. And she could see them. 4 figures making their way down, already past the halfway point, maybe 150 feet above the river. They moved in pairs, proper climbing technique. One person descending while the other managed the belay from above. They had ropes, proper climbing harnesses, probably military mountaineering equipment from a supply depot somewhere. Eva settled behind her rifle and began calculating with the automatic precision that 3 deployments had burned into her nervous system. Range, 210 meters. Wind, negligible inside the gorge, protected from the prevailing winds. Angle, roughly 30 degrees downward. Temperature, 42 degrees Fahrenheit. Humidity, 90% from the river and fog. All factors that affected ballistic performance, trajectory, terminal effectiveness. Target, climbing gear, not flesh. She tracked the lead climber until he reached a narrow ledge and paused to set a new anchor point. His hands were busy with the rope and carabiners. His attention was focused entirely on the rock face, on not falling, on the technical problem of ascending vertical terrain. Eva put her crosshairs on the carabiner connecting his harness to the anchor line. A piece of aluminum or steel, maybe 3 inches long, rated to hold thousands of pounds, critical to the climber's survival. And fired. The round struck metal with a sound like a hammer hitting an anvil. The carabiners shattered, aluminum fragments spinning off into space. The climber's rope went slack for one terrifying second before his belayer above locked off the line and caught him. The man screamed, not in pain, in shock and terror. He was hanging by his partner's grip alone, feet scrambling against bare rock, hands clawing for purchase on stone that offered nothing. His partner hauled on the belay line, dragging him back to the ledge through brute strength. Both men pressed flat against the wall when they reached safety, their faces turned upward, searching the darkness above them for the shooter they couldn't see. Eva shifted to the second pair of climbers. They'd frozen on the rock face the moment they heard the shot. One was clinging to a handhold, body pressed against the stone. The other was wrapped around a fixed piton, going absolutely motionless in the universal human response to sudden danger. She didn't fire. She didn't need to. The message was clear. I can see you. I can hit what I want to hit. The next shot might not be equipment. For 3 full minutes, nobody moved on the gorge wall. 4 climbers, paralyzed by fear and uncertainty, suspended on rock face with nowhere to go, no cover, no concealment, completely exposed to a shooter they couldn't locate. Then, slowly, the lead pair began climbing back up, away from the river, away from the bridge, reversing their descent in a process that was going to take twice as long as coming down. The second pair followed. Eva exhaled slowly, deliberately, letting the adrenaline dissipate. 1 round expended, 176 remaining, One approach interdicted. Above her, Flint's voice called down, "Thorn, western side, they're doing something. I can hear machinery." She scrambled back up the ladder, her hands finding each rung automatically, even though they were slick with moisture. By the time she reached the bridge deck, she could hear it too. An engine. Not from the road, not from a vehicle, from below, from the river. She ran to the western rail and looked down. A boat. An inflatable Zodiac with an outboard motor, cutting through the black water of the New River directly beneath the bridge. 6 men aboard, all armed, wearing tactical gear and life vests. "They went under us," Flint said, his voice tight with disbelief, and something that might have been respect. "While you were watching the climbers, they launched a boat from upstream. They've been planning multiple approaches simultaneously." The Zodiac was already past the bridge, its outboard motor pushing it downstream toward the eastern bank, where they could land and come up behind Eva's position. In 5 minutes, they'd beach the boat. In 10, they'd be on the road behind her. In 15, they'd be close enough to engage from the rear. If 6 fighters got behind them, Eva's defensive position would collapse. They'd be caught in a crossfire between the boat team and whatever Kessler sent from the west. 4 wounded soldiers in a crossfire wouldn't last 30 seconds. Eva's mind raced through options, discarding most of them instantly. She couldn't engage the boat with rifle fire at this range, in this light. She couldn't stop them from landing. She couldn't prevent them from getting behind her. But she could make their landing impossible to navigate. "Flint, keep your rifle on that boat. If they start taking fire, they'll focus on you as the threat. Walker, I need something that floats. Anything. A fuel can, a cooler, a piece of debris. Now." Walker dragged himself across the deck with his arms, his shattered legs trailing uselessly behind him. He found a plastic ammo can that had fallen from their convoy vehicle during the initial ambush, still intact. "This!" Eva grabbed it, pulled the smoke grenade from her vest, her last one, the final piece of expendable equipment she had left. Taped the grenade to the ammo can with medical tape, wrapping it multiple times to ensure it wouldn't separate on impact with the water. Then she pulled the pin and hurled the assembly over the eastern rail with everything she had. The can hit the water 30 meters downstream from the Zodiac with a splash that was lost in the engine noise. 3 seconds later, thick orange smoke erupted from the surface like a signal from hell. It billowed across the river in a massive cloud that swallowed the eastern bank whole, obscuring visibility to zero, turning the landing zone into an impenetrable wall of orange-tinted fog. The Zodiac pilot couldn't see where he was going. He cut the engine, the sudden silence almost shocking. The boat drifted sideways in the current, spinning slowly as the water grabbed it. Eva put a round through the outboard motor. The 50-horsepower engine coughed, sputtered, and died. Gasoline and coolant started leaking from the punctured casing, creating an iridescent sheen on the water. The Zodiac began spinning faster in the current. No power, no steering. The 6 men aboard suddenly helpless on a river they couldn't control. "They're drifting downstream," Walker called, tracking them through the smoke. "They're going past the landing point. Currents got them." Eva watched through her scope as the boat crew paddled frantically with their hands, trying to reach the bank. But the New River's current was strong here, fed by mountain runoff and channeled to the narrow gorge. And the smoke was everywhere, disorienting, making it impossible to gauge distance or direction. Within 2 minutes, they drifted past the bridge and into the rapids below, where the river dropped 10 feet over a rock shelf that broke boats and drowned the unprepared. Eva didn't know if they'd make it to shore, didn't know if they'd drown, didn't know if they'd survive the rapids. They wouldn't be flanking her wounded tonight. That was enough. "That was our last smoke grenade," Flint said quietly. "Our last piece of expendable equipment except ammunition." "I know. And you used it on a river, on a boat team that might have just drowned." "I used it to keep 6 fighters from getting behind us and killing 4 wounded soldiers. The calculus is simple." Flint shook his head slowly. Not in disagreement, in something that looked like awe mixed with horror at what survival required. "Who teaches people to fight like you?" Eva looked at him, looked at Walker, looked at Grady barely breathing on his litter. "Pain," she said quietly. "Pain teaches people to fight like me. Loss, failure, ghosts you can't outrun. That's the curriculum." She checked her watch. 0147 hours. 5 hours, 31 minutes until dawn. 175 rounds remaining. She'd stopped the climbing team, neutralized the boat team, blown a gap in the bridge to block the direct assault. But Kessler still had 30-plus fighters. He still had heavy weapons. He still had time and numbers and the patience that came from professional military experience. And he just lost 3 approaches in a row, which meant the next one would be different. Smarter, more violent, more committed. Men like Kessler didn't accept failure. They escalated. As if reading her thoughts, the loudspeaker crackled one more time. Kessler's voice was different now. The measured command tone was gone. What replaced it was something colder, something personal, something that suggested this had moved beyond tactical problem-solving into territory where ego and reputation mattered more than objectives. "You're not a medic." Eva's blood froze. Her finger tightened involuntarily on the trigger guard. "I've been watching your shots, analyzing them." The radio at 50 meters, destroyed with a single round without injuring the man holding it. The climbing anchor at 210 meters, at night, at a 30-degree angle. The outboard motor on a moving target in darkness and fog. A pause that seemed to last forever. "There's only one person I've ever heard of who shoots like that. A ghost story they used to tell at Fort Bragg. A woman sniper who could thread a needle at 800 meters and then stitch the wound closed afterward. A SEAL who racked up more confirmed engagements in 3 deployments than most snipers get in entire careers." Eva's finger trembled on the trigger guard. Not from cold, from something deeper. "I know who you are, Ghost." The loudspeaker died, and somewhere in the fog, Colonel Vance Kessler began planning his assault. Not against a helpless medic who'd gotten lucky, but against the deadliest sniper he'd ever faced. The sound of Grady's wet breathing was the only noise for 10 long seconds after Kessler's voice faded. Each inhale rattled through damaged tissue. Each exhale whistled past the failing chest seal. The sound of a man drowning in his own blood, fighting for every breath, losing ground with each passing minute. Then he spoke, every word costing him visible effort. "He knows." "He knows a name," Eva said. "Names don't stop bullets." "No, but names change tactics. He'll come, harder now, smarter, won't underestimate you." Eva knelt beside Grady and checked his pulse at multiple points. Carotid, weak. Radial, barely palpable. Femoral, thready. His blood pressure was dropping. His body was compensating by shunting blood away from his extremities to protect his core organs. But compensation had limits. "How long do I have?" Grady asked. "Until dawn." "That's not what I asked, and you know it." Eva looked him in the eyes. He deserved honesty. They all did. Sugarcoating the situation wouldn't make them fight harder. Truth might. "If I don't get you to a surgical team with blood products and a proper OR within 4 hours, the internal bleeding is going to overwhelm your body's ability to compensate. You'll go into irreversible hypovolemic shock. After that, no amount of field medicine will bring you back." 4 hours. Grady closed his eyes, did the math despite the pain fogging his brain, opened them again. "Dawn is 5:12. Then you better hold on tight, Sergeant, because you've got a wife in Knoxville who makes cornbread from scratch every Sunday, and you're not leaving her to eat it alone." Grady's lips twitched in something that might have been a smile. "Sarah's cornbread. Best thing in the world. Won't use Jiffy Mix. Says it's an insult. Then stay alive for Sunday cornbread and the woman who won't compromise on it." Eva squeezed his hand once. His grip was weak, barely there, but he squeezed back. Then she stood and walked back to the western edge of the bridge, forcing herself to compartmentalize. Grady needed surgery. Walker needed surgery. Flint needed blood transfusions. But none of that mattered if they didn't survive the next 5 hours. The fog was thinning slightly, not enough to compromise her position, but enough that she could see farther into the tree line, make out more details. Shapes were becoming forms. Shadows were becoming men. And there were more of them now, significantly more. Kessler had called for reinforcements. Eva counted the heat signatures she could detect through gaps in the fog. 12 on the road where the technicals had been, 8 more in the tree line spreading out in a skirmish line, 6 on the ridge line above where the climbing team had established what looked like a fixed position with sandbags and probably crew-served weapons. 26 visible. Probably another 15 to 20 she couldn't see in reserve or maneuvering through terrain she couldn't observe. She had 175 rounds, against what might be 40-plus fighters now. The math was getting worse. Eva pressed her back against the cold steel of the bridge pylon and looked up at the sky. No stars, no moon, just fog and darkness and the distant sound of diesel engines as Kessler's forces reposition. And somewhere beneath all the training, beneath the sniper discipline and the medic's compassion and the soldier's duty to complete the mission, Evangeline Thorne felt something she hadn't felt since the day she'd held a dying child in Ramadi. She felt alone. Not because no one was with her. 4 Americans lay behind her, trusting her with their lives, believing she could hold this bridge through sheer will and skill. Not because no one was coming. Dawn would bring helicopters and salvation, extraction and medical care. The end of this nightmare. She felt alone because she was the only person on this bridge who understood what was about to happen. The only one who could see the tactical problem clearly enough to know that traditional solutions wouldn't work. The only one who'd been trained to face impossible odds and find ways to survive them. Kessler wasn't going to send another probe. He wasn't going to try another clever flanking maneuver. He'd identified his enemy. He'd measured her capabilities. He'd lost men and time and tactical advantage. And now he would do what professional commanders do when they face a superior shooter in a fixed position with limited ammunition. He would overwhelm her. Every fighter, every weapon, every angle, all at once. Not to capture the bridge, not even to control the crossing anymore, to kill the ghost who'd humiliated him. Eva checked her rifle, checked her pistol, touched the K-bar on her thigh, the blade that had been with her since Bud/S, that had cut through rope and cleared jammed weapons and saved her life in ways that didn't involve violence. Then she crawled to each of her wounded. Walker, Flint, Grady. She checked vitals one by one with hands that were steady despite everything. Adjusted 1.5s that were running low. Tightened bandages that were soaked through. Whispered words she wasn't sure they could hear, but said anyway because sometimes words mattered more than medicine. And when she was done, when she'd done everything a medic could do with no supplies and no support, she returned to her position, settled behind her rifle, and waited for Colonel Kessler to bring his war. The attack didn't come for another 27 minutes. 27 minutes of silence broken only by Grady's labored breathing and the occasional crackle of equipment from the tree line and the distant sound of Eva's own heartbeat in her ears. She used the time, mapped every possible approach in her mind, calculated fields of fire, identified choke points, prepared fallback positions she probably wouldn't live long enough to use. At 0 to 14 hours, static crackled from the emergency beacon on Grady's vest. Not the jammed radio. A different frequency entirely. The one that nobody was supposed to know about except Delta Force veterans who'd kept their old equipment against regulations. Eva grabbed the handset, pressed it to her ear, afraid to hope. Raven Actual, this is Firebase Condor. How copy? Eva's heart slammed against her ribs hard enough to hurt. Condor, Raven Actual reads you 5 by 5. How did you? We've got your emergency beacon, Raven Actual. Someone lit up the Delta net with a PRC 112. Stand by for priority traffic. Static. Then a different voice. Older. Familiar. A voice Eva hadn't heard in 6 months, but would have recognized anywhere. Evangeline. Her breath caught. Colonel Blackwell? I got a call 3 hours ago. Kessler himself told me his sovereign patriot boys had you pinned on Ravenlock Bridge. Said you'd be dead by dawn unless you remembered how to kill. Said it was poetic justice, the student destroying what the master created. Eva closed her eyes. Of course Kessler had called Blackwell. This wasn't just about taking a bridge. This was about humiliating the man who destroyed Kessler's career 8 years ago, who'd testified against him at the court-martial, who'd watched him be led away in handcuffs while 200 soldiers chose Kessler over the army. Colonel, I'm sorry. I know you think I'm wasting... Stop. Blackwell's voice was firm, but not harsh. Command voice, the kind that made soldiers stop talking and start listening. I was wrong, Evangeline, about a lot of things. What you're doing out there, holding that bridge without becoming what Kessler wants you to be, that's harder than anything I ever taught you. That's the kind of fighting that changes who you are instead of just changing the battlefield. I have 5 magazines left. Flint's bleeding out. Grady's lung is collapsing. Walker's legs are destroyed. I don't know if mercy is enough when the math is this bad. You're the best operator I ever trained, not because you could kill, because you knew when to kill. Tonight, you choose when, not if. And if when never comes, then you'll be the soldier I should have trained you to be from the beginning. There was a pause. Eva could hear rotor noise in the background, the distinctive sound of UH-60 Blackhawks and the deeper bass of AH-64 Apaches. We're inbound from Firebase Condor, 2 Apache gunships providing overwatch, and 1 Black Hawk medevac for your casualties. Our ETA is 78 minutes. Can you hold? 78 minutes. An hour and 18 minutes. Eva looked at Grady, at his gray skin and blue lips. Looked at Flint pressing his hand against his thigh to slow the bleeding. Looked at Walker trying not to scream every time he moved. Raven Actual, can you hold? Affirmative, Condor. We will hold. Roger, Warhammer 6 out. Hold your ground, Evangeline. Help is coming. The radio went silent. Eva clipped the handset back and turned to tell Flint and Walker the good news. 78 minutes. They could do 78 minutes. They had to. That's when she heard Kessler's voice again. Not from the loudspeaker, from the emergency frequency. He'd been listening. He had the right equipment and he'd been monitoring their transmissions. Touching reunion, Ghost. Hey, Ironside, you still there? Blackwell's voice crackled back. Hard, angry. The voice of a man who'd spent 30 years in uniform and didn't appreciate someone using his old call sign mockingly. Kessler, tell me, does it hurt? Watching your masterpiece refuse to paint? I spent 8 years in federal prison because you testified against me. 8 years thinking about what I'd do if I ever got the chance to hurt you back. Turns out I don't need to touch you. I just need to break your perfect little protege. Make her choose between her oath and survival. Make her become what you trained her to be. You won't break her. We'll see. 78 minutes is a long time, Colonel. A lot can happen. Tell you what, I'll make it interesting. I'm sending everyone I've got, right now. Every fighter, every weapon, every approach simultaneously, and we're going to find out if your nurse has the stomach for what comes next. The transmission cut. 10 seconds later, flares erupted over the gorge, 3 of them. Brilliant white phosphorus burning at 3,000 degrees, suspended under small parachutes, flooding the bridge deck with light bright enough to read by. Eva's night vision whited out instantly. She ripped the AN/PVS-14 off her helmet and threw it aside, blinking against the searing afterimage burned into her retinas. Contact, Flint shouted. Everywhere. I can't see how many. The light's too bright. Gunfire erupted from 3 directions at once. The ridgeline above, the western tree line, and somewhere to the north, a position Eva hadn't mapped because she thought it was too steep to matter. Rounds slammed into the steel around her with a sound like 1,000 hammers working simultaneously. Sparks flew off the pylons. Ricochets screamed through the air. The noise was deafening. Not individual shots, but a continuous roar of overlapping automatic fire designed to keep every inch of the bridge deck suppressed. Eva pressed flat against the deck and crawled toward Flint's position, her body moving on autopilot while her brain tried to process multiple threat vectors simultaneously. Report! Ridge shooters. At least 6, maybe 8. Western tree line, I count 10, maybe 12 muzzle flashes. And there's something on the north trail. Movement, but I can't count them through the glare. Walker! I'm here. The kid was curled behind the thickest pylon, arms over his head, rifle clutched against his chest. I'm here, Sarge. North side, what do you see? Walker forced himself to look. His whole body was shaking, but he looked because she'd asked him to, and soldiers followed orders even when terrified. 4. No, 5. Coming down the trail fast. They're not using ropes this time. They're just running down the switchback. Running, not climbing, not using proper mountaineering technique. Kessler had abandoned stealth and caution. He was throwing speed and violence at the problem, accepting casualties to achieve breakthrough. Eva's mind split into parallel tracks the way it always did in combat. One calculating threat priority, the other managing her people and their deteriorating condition. Threat priority. The ridge shooters had elevation, but their angle was bad, firing almost straight down. Hard to sustain accuracy against targets pressed flat. Suppressive fire, not precision. Dangerous but survivable if they stayed low. The western tree line was the same. Volume of fire to keep her pinned, not aim shots to kill. They couldn't cross the gap she'd blown, so they were covering for something else. The North Trail team was the real assault. 5 fighters descending fast to the gorge floor, where they'd cross the river and climb to the eastern approach. The only intact section of bridge. That was the kill move. Everything else was supporting action. Flint, ignore the ridge. Ignore the west. They're suppressing. The assault is coming from the north. I can't shoot north from here. The pylons are blocking my angle. Eva grabbed his good arm and pulled him across the deck. Rounds snapping overhead close enough to feel the pressure wake. Sparks raining down on them hot enough to burn through uniform fabric. She shoved him into a gap between 2 support beams that gave him a narrow but clear view of the switchback trail. There, 200 meters, 5 targets descending. Flint shouldered his rifle left-handed, wedged the stock against the rail for stability, found the trail through his iron sights with his dominant eye closed because the light was still too bright to use both eyes. I see them. But Thorne, I'm shooting left-handed with iron sights at 200 meters in bad light. I was a mediocre shot right-handed in daylight. Then aim for the trail itself. Put rounds on the path in front of them. Make them stop moving. You don't need to hit them. You need to slow them so I can work the problem. Flint opened fire. His first 3 rounds hit rocks somewhere below the trail, but the 4th struck close enough that the lead fighter dropped flat. The others bunched up behind him. Exactly the wrong response, but the automatic human reaction to incoming fire. Exactly what Eva needed. Bunched targets, moving on a narrow path, predictable spacing. She settled behind her rifle and found the trail through her scope. 208 meters, 5 targets clustered within a 10-meter span. She could end this in 4 seconds. 5 shots, 5 down, 5 dead. The old Eva could have done it without thinking. The ghost of Ramadi could have made those shots in her sleep. But she wasn't the ghost anymore. She put her first round into the rock wall 6 inches above the lead fighter's head. Stone fragments showered down on him. He screamed and covered his face with his hands. Automatic protective response. Her second round hit the trail surface between the second and third man, spraying gravel into their legs hard enough to bruise through uniform fabric. Both stumbled backward, breaking the formation. Her third round struck the fixed piton anchor at the top of the switchback, the metal post they'd need for the final rope descent to the river. The round sheared it clean off the rock face with a screech of tearing metal. Without that anchor, the last section of trail was a free climb down a sheer wall. 40 feet of vertical rock face with minimal holds. Impossible to descend quickly, probably impossible to descend at all for fighters carrying full combat loads. The 5 fighters froze. They couldn't go forward without the anchor. They couldn't stand up because Flint's suppressive fire kept them prone. They could only go back up the way they'd come. After 30 seconds of indecision, they went back. "They're retreating," Walker yelled. "North team pulling back." Eva didn't celebrate. She was counting rounds. 3 from her magazine. Flint had fired 7. She checked her remaining ammunition with cold precision. 5 magazines left. 172 rounds for the M4. 45 for the Beretta. No grenades. No smoke. Nothing else. The suppressive fire from the ridge and tree line continued for another 2 minutes, then tapered off as magazines ran empty and reload cycles broke the continuous fire. The flares burned out one by one, dropping the bridge back into relative darkness, though Eva's eyes needed minutes to adjust after the brilliant illumination. Then silence. Not peaceful silence, the loaded, pressurized silence of predators deciding whether to continue or withdraw. "Sarge!" Walker's voice was strange. Not scared anymore, something else. Determined. "What?" "Grady isn't breathing right." Eva was beside Grady in 3 seconds. The sergeant's breaths were shallow and rapid, 40 per minute, maybe 50. His lips were turning blue despite the oxygen she tried to provide. His pulse was barely there, a threadbare flutter beneath cold skin. Hemorrhagic shock. Stage 4, the final stage before arrest. "No, no, no, no." Eva ripped open Grady's jacket, pressed her ear to his chest. Breath sounds on the right side diminished. Left side crackling, wet. The shrapnel had done more damage than she'd initially assessed. There was blood in the chest cavity, compressing the lung, preventing adequate gas exchange. Hemothorax. Grady was drowning in his own blood, and the needle decompression she'd done earlier had only bought time, not fixed the underlying problem. "I need to decompress his chest again." Eva's hands moved automatically, pulling supplies from her med kit. "Walker, in my kit, side pocket. There's a needle decompression kit. Green package. Get it." Walker dragged himself to the kit with his arms, found the package, tossed it to Eva with shaking hands. She tore it open. 14-gauge needle, 3¼ inches long, the last one she had. She found the landmark, second intercostal space, mid-clavicular line, and pushed the needle through the chest wall with smooth, controlled pressure. Blood rushed out, not air, blood. Dark, oxygen-poor venous blood that poured through the catheter and pooled on the bridge deck beneath Grady's body, spreading in a viscous puddle that reflected the distant muzzle flashes. "Oh God," Walker whispered. "Is he?" "He's not dead. This is buying time. But he needs whole blood in a chest tube and a surgeon. Nothing I do here is fixing the problem, only delaying the inevitable." Eva adjusted the catheter angle. More blood drained. Grady's breathing eased slightly. Not much, but enough to tell her she'd reached the pleural space, that she'd given his lung room to expand. "How much time?" Flint asked. "Maybe an hour, maybe less. His body's running on fumes. Every minute we're still on this bridge is another minute closer to losing him. Then we hold for 75 more minutes and get him off this bridge." It was the simplest statement and the most complex. Hold, as if it were that easy, as if survival were just a matter of will. Eva taped the catheter in place, elevated Grady's legs with a folded pack to improve venous return to his core, squeezed the IV bag to push the last of the saline faster, giving his body something to work with, even though it wasn't blood, wasn't what he really needed. Then she stood up, and for one moment, just one, she pressed both hands against her face and breathed. Her fingers were sticky with Grady's blood. It smelled like copper and salt and failure, like every patient she'd lost and everyone she'd saved, and the impossible distance between the two. Thorne, Flint's voice, quiet, close. He'd crawled over while she worked. We need to talk about something. Not now, Flint. Now, because in 30 minutes it might not matter, because I might not be conscious enough to say it. She lowered her hands and looked at him. His face was the color of old paper. His bandages were soaked through again, the tourniquet on his thigh no longer adequate to stop the bleeding completely. He was dying slowly, blood loss accumulating, his body's reserve capacity exhausted. What? Kessler's not going to stop. You know that. He's lost the climbing approach, the boat approach, the rapid assault. But he's got numbers, and he's got time. He'll find another way. He always does. That's what makes him dangerous. I know. 172 rounds against 40 men isn't a fight, Thorne. It's a math problem. And the math doesn't work. Not if you keep shooting to wound. Not if you keep giving them chances to retreat and regroup. She knew where this was going. Had known since Flint mentioned Lily and Mr. Trotters. Had known since she'd revealed the trident and admitted who she'd been. What are you suggesting? Flint held her gaze. His eyes were clear despite the blood loss, lucid with the particular clarity that came from facing death honestly. I'm suggesting that if it comes down to it, you might have to break your rule. That oath you swore, the one about never killing again. Because if you don't, we're all going to die here, including a 19-year-old kid who's never even fired at a person, and a sergeant with a wife in Knoxville who makes cornbread from scratch, and a father who needs to say goodnight to a stuffed horse named Mr. Trotters. The air between them went cold, colder than the October fog, colder than the steel beneath them. No. Thorne! I said no. I don't kill. Not anymore. Not ever again. Even if it means we die, all four of us? We're not going to die. I'll find another way. There's always another way. You don't know that. I know that I swore an oath. 2 oaths, actually. One as a SEAL and one as a medic. And the medic oath is the one I chose to keep. Do no harm. I will stop them. I will break their weapons and their will and their ability to fight. But I will not put another body in the ground. Her voice cracked on the last word. Flint, I can't carry any more ghosts. I can't close my eyes and see more faces. I can't become that person again. Flint was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was soft, but each word landed like a hammer blow. My daughter's name is Lily. Flint, please don't. She's got my eyes, brown with gold flecks that her mother says look like honey, and her mother's stubborn streak. And she sleeps with that stuffed horse, Mr. Trotters, every single night. When I FaceTime from deployment, she puts the phone up to the horse's ear. She makes me say goodnight to both of them. Good night, Lily. Good night, Mr. Trotters. Every time, like it's the most important ritual in the world. His voice broke. Why are you telling me this? Because if you won't kill to save your own life, maybe you'll kill to save hers. The little girl who needs her daddy to come home and say good night to a stuffed horse. The little girl who's going to turn 3 next month and won't understand why daddy didn't make it to her birthday party. Won't understand why there's a folded flag instead of a father. Eva turned away from him, walked to the edge of the bridge, gripped the railing until her knuckles went white and her hands ached. Below, the Black River churned. Above, the fog shifted. And inside her chest, 2 oaths collided with the force of a head-on collision. Do no harm. Protect the innocent. Both true, both impossible to reconcile, both demanding opposite actions. She couldn't answer him. Not because she didn't have an answer, but because the honest answer terrified her more than anything Colonel Kessler could throw at this bridge. At 02:37 hours, the situation changed. Thorn, Grady's voice, barely audible, each word a whisper that cost him everything. Come here. She knelt beside him. His skin was gray now, waxy with the particular pallor that preceded death. His breathing was labored despite the needle decompression, each inhale a wet, rattling effort that made her medical training scream. The chest seal was failing completely. Air was leaking around the edges, entering the pleural space, creating tension that compressed his lung and pushed his organs sideways. My left pocket, Grady whispered. Reach in. Eva reached into his cargo pocket and felt something hard and rectangular. She pulled it out. A radio. Not a standard military radio. This was different, smaller, more compact. An AN/PRC 112G emergency beacon, the kind issued to downed pilots and special operations personnel. The kind that had been phased out of regular Army units years ago. Where did you get this? I was Delta, before I was infantry. A ghost of a smile crossed his cracked lips. Fort Bragg, 2012 to 2018. 3 deployments to Mosul. Kept the beacon when I transferred. Old habits. Figured if things ever got bad enough. Why didn't you tell me about this 2 hours ago? Because 2 hours ago, I thought we'd die before it mattered. I was wrong. You're the most stubborn person I've ever met, Thorn. And I've worked with Delta operators. Eva turned the beacon over in her hands. It was ruggedized, waterproof, designed to survive crashes in combat and the worst conditions imaginable. And it operated on a frequency separate from standard military communications. Satellite linked through the GPS constellation. Impossible to jam with the equipment a militia would carry. She powered it on. The tiny screen lit up green, the backlight seeming impossibly bright after hours of darkness. Emergency beacon active, signal acquired, transmitting coordinates. It broadcast to any military asset within 300 miles, Grady said, fighting for every word. Air, ground, naval. Anyone with the right receiver will pick it up. And Kessler can't jam it. Not a chance. Encrypted. Satellite bounced. He'd need a $1 million EW suite just to detect it. Eva pressed the transmit button and spoke into the microphone. Any station. This is Sergeant Evangeline Thorne, U.S. Army combat medic, position Ravenlock Bridge, Fayette-Raleigh County line. 4 critical casualties. Enemy force of approximately 40 combatants. Requesting immediate extraction and close air support. How copy? Static. Then a voice. Clear. Professional. The voice of someone sitting in a climate-controlled operations center, somewhere safe, reading from procedures, following protocols. Ravenlock, this is Warhammer 6, 101st Aviation Regiment. We read you 5 by 5. Confirming your beacon coordinates. What is your situation? Eva's eyes burned. She blinked hard. Now was not the time to break. Warhammer 6, I have 3 wounded requiring immediate surgical intervention. 1 critical with hemothorax and hemorrhagic shock. 1 with arterial bleed and amputation injuries. 1 with bilateral lower extremity fractures. Enemy force is estimated 40 combatants with crew-served weapons, mortars, and technical vehicles. Bridge is partially destroyed. I am the only combat-effective personnel on site. Copy, Ravenlock. Stand by. Muffled voices in the background. The sound of people conferring, checking assets, calculating response times. Ravenlock, be advised we already have a flight package inbound to your position. 2 AH-64 Apache gunships and 1 UH-60 medevac. ETA is 68 minutes. Can you hold? 68 minutes. Eva looked at Grady, at his gray skin and blue lips, and the blood pooled beneath his stretcher. Looked at Flint pressing his hand against his thigh. Looked at Walker, trying not to scream every time he moved. Ravenlock, confirm you can hold for 68 minutes? Warhammer 6, affirmative, we will hold. Roger, Warhammer 6 out. Hold your ground. Help is coming. The radio went silent. Eva clipped the beacon to her vest and turned to her soldiers. 68 minutes. Walker closed his eyes. Flint let out a breath that was almost a laugh, almost a sob. Grady just looked at her. That's a long time, Thorne. It's a lifetime. And that's exactly what it's going to buy us. Lifetimes. Plural. All of us. She stood up and moved to the western rail. Out there in the fog and the darkness, Kessler was planning, calculating, adjusting, and she needed to be ready. Exactly 11 minutes later, Kessler made his move. But it wasn't the move Eva expected. Instead of an assault, a single figure walked out of the tree line. Unarmed, hands raised, moving slowly toward the western edge of the gap. Eva tracked him through her scope. He was wearing civilian clothes over body armor. Late 50s, gray hair cropped military short, posture and bearing that screamed career officer. Someone who'd spent decades in uniform and couldn't shake it even after leaving. Kessler himself. He stopped at the edge of the gap she'd blown and stood there, hands visible, looking across the 40 feet of empty space at her position. Ghost! His voice carried in the night air without amplification. Raw. Human. I'd like to talk. Then talk. Face to face. Across the gap. I'm unarmed. You can verify that from where you are. You're wearing armor. And I could put a round through your eye socket from this distance without touching the Kevlar. We both know that. So explain why I should listen instead of shooting. Because I've realized something. Something that changes the tactical problem. Eva didn't respond. She kept her crosshair on the center of his chest, right where the plates would stop around, but wouldn't prevent the kinetic energy from breaking ribs and collapsing lungs. I've lost 9 men tonight, Kessler continued. 2 to the river, unconfirmed but probable drowning. 3 on the climbing team with injuries from falling rock. 1 with a shattered ankle that ended his military career. 4 from the first probe. 9 men, and not a single one of them is dead. Not one. No bodies to recover. No next of kin notifications. No flags on coffins. He paused. Let that information settle. Do you know how unusual that is? In my 22 years of combat, 12 in the Army, 10 running my own operation, I have never faced an enemy who wounded without killing. Not once. Every engagement I've ever been in, people died. That's what combat is. But tonight, 9 casualties and 0 KIA. Get to the point, Colonel. The point is that I've been fighting a ghost story, a legend, the deadliest sniper in SEAL history, and in 3 hours you haven't killed a single one of my men. Not because you can't. I've seen your shots. That radio destruction at 50 meters, the climbing anchor at 210, the outboard motor on a moving target. You could have killed 9 times and chose not to. Every single time. Eva said nothing. Her finger rested on the trigger guard, indexed, ready. That tells me something about you, Ghost. It tells me you're not fighting for a cause or a flag or an objective. You're fighting for the 4 people behind you, trying to do it without becoming the thing you swore you'd never be again. Her finger trembled. Just slightly, enough that she hated herself for the weakness. I respect that, I do. But here's the problem. My men don't share my respect. They're angry, they're hurt, they're humiliated. And when I send them across, and I will send them across, they won't aim for legs and shoulders. They'll aim for heads. Your wounded will die, and then you'll have to choose between your oath and their lives. Is that a negotiation? It's a reality check. You have 68 minutes until those helicopters arrive. I have 34 combat effective fighters. I have time to resupply ammunition. I have multiple approach routes. You have what? 5 magazines? A pistol? No grenades? No smoke? He knew. Too much. Which meant he had intelligence assets Eva hadn't detected. Someone with eyes on her position. Someone reporting her status. Walk away, Ghost. Take your wounded east on their stretchers. I'll give you a 30-minute head start. My medics will even help carry them. All I want is the bridge. Well, what's left of it. You've made your point. You've proven you're not helpless. Now let it go. The bridge is destroyed. The eastern span is intact. That's enough for my purposes. And what are your purposes? What happens when you control the crossing? That's not your concern. It is if American civilians are on the other side. It is if you're planning to use this position to interdict federal forces. It is if this is about more than just territory. Kessler was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, the respect was gone. What replaced it was something harder, colder. You have 10 minutes to decide. After that, I'm sending everyone. And Ghost, this time they won't aim to wound. This time it's about revenge. You've humiliated trained fighters, made them look incompetent. That's not something men with military pride forgive. He turned and walked back into the tree line. Eva lowered her rifle. Her arms were shaking, not from fatigue, from the adrenaline dump of having a man she could have killed standing 40 feet away, asking her to abandon the only thing standing between him and whatever he planned to do on the other side of this gorge. You should have taken the deal, Flint said from behind her. No. Thorne, he's offering to let us walk, to let us survive. We could carry Walker and Grady on stretchers, get them to medical care faster than waiting for helicopters. He's offering to let us run. There's a difference. The moment we leave this bridge, we lose every advantage we have. Position, elevation, the choke point we've created. We'd be in open terrain with no cover, vulnerable to fire from multiple directions. He'd let us get maybe half a mile before cutting us down. You don't know that. I do know that. Kessler doesn't leave witnesses. He told us his name, his full name and unit designation, gave us details about his force composition and his plans. You don't do that if you're planning to let people walk away and testify later. He's lying, using our concern for the wounded against us. Flint was silent, because he knew she was right. 65 minutes, Eva said. That's what we have to survive. 65 minutes until the Apaches arrive and change the equation completely. Then Kessler's 40 fighters don't matter. Then his mortars and his tactics and his experience all become irrelevant, because 2 Apache gunships can suppress an entire battalion. And Kessler's 10-minute clock runs out in 9. Eva moved fast now, positioning, thinking, planning with the cold precision that 3 deployments had burned into her nervous system. She pulled Walker's M4 and his 2 remaining magazines. The kid couldn't use it anymore, not effectively, added them to her own load. 3 magazines for her primary rifle, 2 for Walker's rifle. 1 partial she was already carrying. Total, 168 rounds. She distributed them strategically. The full magazines for herself, the partial for Flint as a last resort. Then she did something none of them expected. She crawled to the center of the bridge, found the maintenance hatch she'd used before, and disappeared beneath the deck. 3 minutes later, she came back up carrying a 4-foot length of steel rebar she'd pried from the bridge's internal structure with her K-bar. She bent it across the pylon into a rough L shape, using the steel's natural flexibility to create an improvised obstacle. She wedged it into the deck grating at the eastern approach, the only path anyone could use to reach their position now that she'd blown the western span. Then she took medical tape from her nearly empty kit and wrapped it around the rebar at shin height across the approach path, creating a tripwire that was invisible in the darkness against the steel deck. Low-tech, brutal, effective. That's your plan? Flint asked. A piece of rebar and some tape? That's part of the plan. The other part is you not missing when they trip over it. Flint checked his rifle one more time, adjusted his grip with his mangled right hand, using the remaining thumb and index finger to stabilize while his left hand worked the trigger. 5 months ago, I was coaching Little League in Clarksville. My biggest problem was whether to start Timmy Hawkins at shortstop or second base. Now I'm shooting left-handed on a blown bridge in the middle of the night with a tourniquet on my leg and 3 fingers gone. Life's funny that way. This isn't funny, Thorn. No, it's not. She looked at him, at the blood soaked through his uniform, at the pain etched in lines around his eyes, at the determination that kept him conscious and functional despite everything. But we're going to survive it. And when we do, you're going to go home and start Timmy Hawkins at shortstop and say goodnight to Lily and Mr. Trotters. That's not hope, Flint. That's a promise. Because I don't break promises, and I don't lose patience I can save. His eyes glistened. He nodded once and turned back to his firing position. Eva checked her watch. 0324 hours. 64 minutes until the Apaches arrived. She could hear them now, voices in the fog, boots on gravel, the metallic click of weapons being charged, the specific sounds of an army preparing to move. Kessler's 10 minutes had expired 7 minutes ago. He was coming. And this time it wouldn't be probes or demonstrations. This would be everything he had. The final assault. The overwhelming force that ended resistance, not through skill, but through sheer mass. Eva settled behind her rifle, breathed, felt her heartbeat slow the way it always did before violence. 60 beats per minute, then 50, then 40. The resting heart rate of someone whose body had been trained to peak performance, whose nervous system had learned to manage adrenaline rather than be consumed by it. The world narrowed to the space visible through her scope, and she waited. Not as the ghost of Ramadi, not as a medic who'd sworn to do no harm, but as something in between, something that didn't have a name yet, something that walked the line between two identities and two oaths and found strength in the contradiction. A woman who could kill with every shot she fired, but chose, with every fiber of her exhausted, blood-stained, terrified soul, not to. 64 minutes, 4 wounded, 168 rounds, and the sound of 40 boots getting closer. The boots stopped for 3 seconds. Everything on Ravenlock Bridge went quiet. The kind of quiet that presses against your eardrums and makes your pulse sound like thunder in a cathedral. Eva counted heartbeats. 1, 2, 3. Then Kessler's voice cut through the darkness. Not the loudspeaker, his actual voice, barking commands from somewhere just inside the tree line. The voice of a battalion commander who'd led men through Fallujah and Ramadi, who knew how to inspire and intimidate in equal measure. All units execute, execute, execute. The western tree line exploded with muzzle flash. Not the scattered probing fire from before. This was concentrated, disciplined, overlapping sectors of automatic weapons fire designed to keep every inch of the bridge deck under suppression. The kind of fire superiority that infantry manuals described in theoretical terms, but that required training and coordination to execute properly. Rounds hammered the steel pylons like 1,000 jackhammers working simultaneously. Sparks cascaded off every surface in showers of orange and white. The noise was physical, a wall of sound that crushed thought and replaced it with pure animal survival instinct. Eva pressed her face against the cold deck and screamed over the roar. "Nobody moves! Stay behind the pylons! Don't give them a target!" But this wasn't the assault. She knew that. This was the overture, the curtain raiser. Kessler was pinning them down so his real attack could move into position unobserved. She forced herself to think through the noise, through the fear, through the instinct that screamed at her to stay down and survive. Where? Which direction? What was the actual threat? The gap she'd blown blocked the west. The climbing trail was compromised. The river approach had failed. So where was Kessler sending his men this time? The answer came from Walker. His voice cracked with terror, but he got the words out. "Above us! Sarge! Above us on the cables!" Eva rolled onto her back and looked up. The bridge's suspension cables. 4 massive steel lines running from the anchor towers to the deck, stretched overhead in parallel arcs that supported the span's weight, each one thick as a man's thigh. cold steel that would be slick with condensation and fog. And on the two westernmost cables, moving hand over hand with the practiced ease of soldiers who'd trained for exactly this maneuver, were men. 6 of them, 3 on each cable, crossing the 40-foot gap she'd blown by traversing the suspension cables like they were doing a high-wire act 60 feet above the gorge. It was insane. It was suicidal. The cables were slick. The men had no safety lines. One slip meant a 60-foot fall to water cold enough to induce cardiac arrest on contact. And it was working. The first man was already past the midpoint, 20 feet from the eastern anchor tower, 20 feet from being on top of them, where he could fire down at angles the pylons couldn't protect against. Eva rolled back to prone, shouldered her rifle, and aimed straight up. The angle was terrible, almost vertical, shooting past her own feet toward targets backlit by muzzle flash from the western tree line. Her neck screamed in protest. Her arms burned from holding the rifle at an impossible angle. She put her crosshairs on the cable grip of the lead climber, not on the man himself, on his hands where they gripped the steel cable, and fired. The round struck the cable 6 inches from his hands. The impact vibration ran through the steel like a guitar string being plucked, amplified by the cable's tension and length. The man's grip slipped. He swung sideways, legs kicking, one hand clawing desperately at the cable, while the other windmilled through empty air in a futile attempt to grab something that wasn't there. He caught himself, barely. His fingers found purchase, and he clung to the cable with both hands, no longer trying to advance, just trying not to fall. Eva fired again. This time, she hit the man's pack, the small assault bag strapped to his back. The round tore through the fabric and the pack dropped away, falling 60 feet to splash into the black water below. The sudden loss of weight jerked his body upward. His grip shifted. His legs flailed as he tried to wrap them around the cable for additional support. "Go back!" Eva shouted at him. "Go back or the next one takes your hand. I won't miss." The man looked down at her. She could see his face through the scope, even at this angle. Young, maybe 25, eyes wide with the unique terror of someone hanging by their fingers above death, teeth bared in a rictus of fear and exertion. He let go of the cable with one hand and reached for his sidearm. Stupid, desperate, the act of a man who couldn't think past the immediate moment. Eva shot the holster off his belt. The pistol tumbled into the darkness below, joining the pack in the river. The man froze, hanging by one hand and a leg wrapped around a steel cable. Disarmed, 60 feet above death. No pack, no weapon, no options except retreat or fall. His face went from fury to something Eva recognized intimately. The moment a fighter realizes he's completely and utterly outmatched. He started climbing backward, hand over hand, slowly, carefully, each movement deliberate because one mistake meant death. The other 5 followed. One by one, they reversed course, moving back toward the western anchor tower in safety. But the suppressive fire from the west hadn't stopped, and Eva had just burned 3 rounds on a single target. 3 rounds that hadn't wounded or killed, just deterred. 3 rounds out of 168 that couldn't be replaced. She checked the cable crossing. All 6 men retreating, silhouettes visible against the slightly lighter sky to the west. No immediate threat from above. She turned her attention back to ground level. "Flint, status." Silence. "Flint, report." "I'm hit." His voice was tight with pain and shock. "Ricochet during the suppression. Didn't feel it until just now. Right thigh." Eva's blood went cold. She crawled to his position, her body low against the deck, moving through the darkness by memory and touch. Flint was slumped against the pylon. His left hand was pressed against his right thigh. Blood seeped between his fingers, dark and pulsing. Bright red arterial blood that meant a major vessel had been compromised. Ricochet during the cable crossing. Fragment came off the pylon. Felt like someone punched my leg. Then I felt the wet. Eva ripped open what was left of her med kit. She was running out of everything. 2 bandages left. No more hemostatic gauze. 1 tourniquet, the last one. She pulled it and cinched it around Flint's upper thigh, just below where his hip joint articulated. The tourniquet went on fast and tight. The windlass cranked until the bleeding slowed to a trickle. Flint screamed through clenched teeth, a raw animal sound that spoke to pain beyond words. I'm sorry, Flint. I have to make it tight enough to stop the arterial flow. I know it hurts. Just do it. Don't apologize. Do your job. She cranked the windlass another full turn. The bleeding stopped completely. Flint's face went white. Sweat poured down his jaw despite the cold. His breathing was fast and shallow, the body's automatic response to shock and pain. Can you still shoot? He looked at her with eyes that were starting to glaze, pupils dilating as his blood pressure dropped. My right leg is destroyed and my right hand is destroyed. I'm shooting left-handed while lying on my left side with a tourniquet that feels like it's sawing my leg off. What do you think? I think you're the toughest man I've ever met, and I need you to stay conscious and keep that rifle pointed west for 60 more minutes. Can you do that? Flint picked up his rifle with his left hand, rested the barrel on the lower rail, found a firing position that kept his weight off the wounded leg. Yeah, I can do that. But Thorne, if I pass out, you need to know something. Check the tourniquet every 15 minutes. If it loosens, I'm dead in 5. If it stays tight, I might lose the leg, but I'll live. You're not going to lose the leg, and you're not going to pass out. Those Apaches are coming, and they're going to get you off this bridge alive. From your mouth to God's ears. The suppressive fire stopped at 0341 hours. The silence that followed was worse, because Eva knew what it meant. Kessler was cycling, reloading, repositioning, preparing the next phase. And then she heard the one sound she'd been dreading all night, an engine, not from the road, not from the river, from above, from the sky. Drone, Walker yelled. I can hear it. It's close. Small quadcopter by the sound. Eva searched the sky. There, a small commercial quadcopter, barely visible against the fog, hovering 60 meters above the bridge. A red position light blinked on its underside. Camera drone, reconnaissance. Kessler was mapping their exact positions with thermal imaging, identifying every wounded soldier, every piece of cover, every blind spot. She raised her rifle and tracked the drone through her scope. 80 meters straight up, a target the size of a basketball moving in a slow circle. 1 round. The drone exploded into fragments that rained down on the deck like plastic confetti. But the damage was done. Even 30 seconds of aerial footage would have given Kessler everything he needed. The position of every casualty, Eva's location, the improvised rebar obstacle, everything. He knows where we are now, Flint said. Exactly where, down to the meter. He knew before, the drone just confirmed it. So what changes? His mortar team. They've resupplied. They're going to drop rounds right on top of us. As if she'd summoned it, the first mortar round whistled overhead. Not the tentative adjusting fire from before. This round came in fast and accurate. The math already done. The firing solution already calculated. It hit the bridge deck 30 meters east, close enough to send a shockwave through the steel that Eva felt in her ribs. They're adjusted. Everyone to the east pylon cluster. Move, now. She grabbed Grady's stretcher and dragged it, her hands slipping on blood-soaked handles. Walker pulled himself with his arms, every movement agony. Flint crawled on his belly, dragging his right leg behind him, leaving a blood trail on the deck. The second mortar round hit the deck, where they'd been positioned 5 seconds earlier. Steel buckled. A section of railing twisted into the air and crashed into the gorge below. They've got our old position dialed in, Eva shouted. Stay here. Get behind the pylons. Don't move. The third round struck the western edge of their new cluster. 10 feet away, close enough for shrapnel to ping off the pylon above Walker's head, with sounds like angry hornets. The kid flinched, but didn't scream. He was past screaming, past fear. In that place where only survival mattered and nothing else registered. The fourth round hit the deck to the north, the fifth to the south. They were bracketing, walking rounds in a tightening pattern designed to find the exact center of the target through systematic elimination of errors. Ava counted the interval between impacts. 12 seconds. That meant one mortar tube, one experienced crew who knew their weapon system. Sustained rate of fire that they could maintain until they ran out of ammunition or Eva's position ceased to exist. They had maybe 20 rounds based on standard ammunition loads for a 60mm mortar. She could survive 20 rounds if they stayed behind the pylons. Steel I-beams would absorb most of the fragmentation, turn supersonic metal into spent fragments that rattled harmlessly off steel plate. Most, not all. The sixth round exploded 8 feet from Grady's stretcher. A shard of steel the size of a playing card, razor sharp and white hot, embedded itself in the deck 2 inches from his head, close enough that he could have reached out and touched it. He didn't flinch. His eyes were closed. His breathing barely visible, each exhale so shallow it barely moved his chest. Grady, Eva checked his pulse at the carotid. Present, weak, barely holding on. His body was shutting down, conserving energy, preparing for the end. Still here, he whispered. Barely. Seventh round, eighth, ninth, each one closer, each one louder. The bridge groaned and shuddered beneath him like a wounded animal that couldn't understand why it was being hurt. On the 11th round, the shelling stopped. Ava waited. 10 seconds. 20. 30. No more impacts. No whistling descent. Just silence and the ringing in her ears and the smell of explosive residue. They're done. Either they're out of ammunition or they're saving rounds for the final push when they know exactly where we'll be. She checked her watch. 03:45 hours. 53 minutes until the Apaches arrived. 53 minutes. She'd held this bridge for nearly 6 hours. 4 wounded soldiers, all of them deteriorating. Her medical supplies exhausted. Her ammunition dwindling. Her body running on adrenaline and willpower and the stubborn refusal to let Colonel Vance Kessler win. And then Walker stopped breathing. Not the labored, shallow breathing of before. Not the rapid panting of panic and pain. Not the whistling wheeze of someone fighting for air. Walker's chest simply stopped moving. His eyes stared at nothing. His mouth hung open slightly. No! Eva lunged to Walker's side, checked the airway. Clear. No obstruction. Checked for a pulse at the carotid. Nothing. The radial pulse. Nothing. The femoral. Nothing. Cardiac arrest. No, 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 not the kid, not Walker. She interlocked her fingers and began CPR. 30 compressions, 2 breaths. 30 compressions, 2 breaths. The rhythm was mechanical, automatic, burned into her muscle memory by hundreds of hours of training and real-world application. Come on, Casey, come on, you don't get to do this. You hear me? 30 compressions, 2 breaths. You told Flint you wanted your mom to be proud. You wanted to know if joining up was the right choice. It was. You made it matter. Now come back. 30 compressions, 2 breaths. Flint watched from his position with the expression of a man witnessing something he couldn't stop. Something inevitable and terrible and wrong. His lips moved, but no sound came out. Thorne. Shut up, Flint. I'm working. Thorne, listen to me. I said shut up. 30 compressions. 2 breaths. She felt a rib crack beneath her palms. The specific sound and sensation that every medic recognizes and hates because it means you're doing it right, but it feels like you're breaking the person you're trying to save. She kept going. 2 minutes. 3. 4. Her arms burned. Her shoulders screamed. Sweat poured down her face and mixed with the blood on her hands, creating pink rivulets that dripped onto Walker's chest. At the 5-minute mark, she stopped, pressed 2 fingers to Walker's carotid artery. Nothing. Held a hand over his mouth. No breath. Put her ear to his chest. No heartbeat. Eva sat back on her heels, looked down at the young man's face. 19 years old. Casey Walker from Ohio. First deployment. Never fired at a person before tonight. Wanted to make his mom proud. Died on a bridge in West Virginia without ever understanding why. Nobody spoke. There was nothing to say. No words adequate for the moment. No platitudes that would make it better. The fog drifted through the steel beams. The wind carried the distant sound of men preparing for another assault. And Specialist Casey Walker lay still beneath an October sky he'd never see become dawn. Eva closed Walker's eyes with 2 fingers, the gesture automatic and gentle. Pulled the emergency blanket from her kit, the last one, the silver mylar that was supposed to prevent hypothermia, but now served a different purpose, and draped it over his body. Then she stood up. Her hands were shaking. Her vision was blurred. Something inside her chest was cracking along a fault line that ran all the way back to Ramadi, to a boy lying in dust, to a promise she'd made over his body that she'd never take another life. She'd lost a patient, on her bridge, under her care. The one thing a medic exists to prevent. Flint saw it in her face, the fracture spreading, the medic's composure disintegrating under the weight of the one outcome she couldn't accept. Thorne, don't. Don't what? Don't go dark, not now. We need you. We need you functional. I lost him. Walker was dying before he hit this bridge. You bought him 3 extra hours with field medicine and force of will. That's not failure. That's a miracle that ran out of time. 3 hours wasn't enough. No, it wasn't. And that's not your fault. That's blood loss and shock and injuries that needed a trauma center, not a bridge deck. You did everything possible. Everything. Eva turned away from him, walked to the western rail, gripped it with both hands, and looked across the gap at the tree line where 34 men were preparing to kill her. Something shifted inside her. Not a break, a hardening, like steel that's been heated past its limit and then plunged into cold water, tempered, made stronger through stress. The grief was still there, burning underneath, but over it settled a layer of something cold and sharp and absolutely focused. She'd lost one. She would not lose 2 more. Flint. Yeah, Thorne. Stay on the north side. Anyone coming from the Gorge Trail, you put rounds at their feet. Make them think twice. Copy. Grady. No response. Grady. Here. Faint. So faint she almost missed it. Like a voice from very far away. Eva crawled to him. His pulse was barely there, a fading flutter like a bird with broken wings, trying one last time to fly. His skin was cold. His lips were blue. The chest seal was leaking air around the edges, the adhesive failing. Stay awake. That's an order, Sergeant. 53 minutes. His eyes opened, unfocused, drifting. That's all I need from you. Then Sarah gets her husband back. Tell me about her, about Sarah. She makes cornbread from scratch every Sunday. Won't use Jiffy. Says it's an insult to her grandmother. What else? She sings in the shower. Thinks I can't hear. She's terrible. A breath. Wet. Painful. Rattling. I love it. Then you stay alive for Sunday cornbread and bad shower singing. 53 minutes, Grady. That's all. He tried to nod, barely managed it. Eva moved back to the western rail and settled into her final position. She had 5 magazines, 165 rounds. 1 pistol with 3 magazines, 45 rounds. 210 rounds to survive 53 minutes. She did the math the way snipers do math. Cold, precise, without emotion. If Kessler sent his remaining 34 fighters in a single wave, She'd need to stop each one with an average of 6 rounds. That was possible at close range with aimed shots. But at night, in fog, with fatigue and emotion and 2 wounded soldiers to protect, 6 rounds per target was optimistic. She needed to be better than optimistic. She needed to be perfect. And then the fog shifted and she saw them. Not from the west, not from the north, from the east. A second force, coming up the road behind them. The road she'd assumed was clear because the convoy had gone that way hours ago. 8 men moving in tactical formation, armed, helmeted, professional spacing and movement that spoke to military training. Kessler hadn't just sent teams from the west, north, and river. He'd sent a team east, miles east, hours ago, to loop around through terrain she hadn't considered and approach from the only direction she wasn't covering because it was supposed to be her escape route. "Contact rear," she screamed. "Eastern approach. 8 fighters, 200 meters." Flint spun his body on the deck, using his good arm and leg to pivot. He saw them immediately. "I've got them! I've got them!" Flint opened fire. His first rounds went high, pulled by adrenaline and the awkward left-handed grip and the pain that was making it hard to focus. But his 4th round caught the point man's shin, and the fighter went down screaming, clutching his leg. The rest scattered to the road's edges and returned fire. Muzzle flashes in the darkness, the snap of rounds passing overhead. Eva pivoted to support Flint, but the moment she turned east, the western tree line erupted again with suppressive fire. She felt rounds snap past her head, inches, not feet, so close she could feel the pressure wake, the way the air moved as supersonic bullets displaced it. Two-front engagement, exactly what Kessler had planned from the beginning, force her to choose which direction to face while both sides closed in. Make her defensive position untenable through geometry rather than firepower. She couldn't cover both. Flint couldn't move effectively. They were being flanked, and there was no solution except to abandon the position or fight 2 battles simultaneously. Eva made a decision that defied every instinct she had. She gave Flint her rifle and all her remaining M4 magazines. 5 magazines, Western approach, keep them pinned, don't let them advance. "What are you going to use?" She pulled her Beretta M9 from its holster. 45 rounds in 3 magazines and years of close-quarters combat training that most soldiers never received. This. Then she ran east, sprinting down the bridge deck toward the 8 advancing fighters with nothing but a pistol and the muscle memory of a woman who'd been the most lethal, close-quarters operator in the history of naval special warfare. She hit the deck next to where Walker's body lay under the silver blanket and immediately began firing. The Beretta cracked in her hands. Sharp, precise reports that were almost lost in the cacophony of rifle fire from both directions. 9mm rounds that didn't have the range or penetration of rifle rounds, but were devastating at close quarters in the hands of someone who knew how to use them. Her first round caught the second fighter's knee, the specific point where the femur articulated with the tibia, where a hit would collapse the leg structure and make standing impossible. He dropped instantly. Her second round shattered the rifle scope of a man trying to aim at her position. The scope exploded into fragments that peppered his face with glass and metal. He dropped his weapon and clutched his eyes. Her third hit the road surface in front of the lead formation, spraying asphalt fragments into the faces of 2 fighters who flinched and stumbled backward. The Eastern team was 50 meters away now. Eva could see their faces. Young men, determined, terrified, charging toward a bridge held by a woman with a pistol who shouldn't have been able to stop them, but was anyway. She emptied her first magazine in 6 seconds. 7 rounds, 3 hits, all below the waist, all mobility kills. One fighter down with a shattered ankle, his foot twisted at an impossible angle. One crawling with a round through his calf, leaving a blood trail on the asphalt. One clutching his thigh and screaming for a medic, calling out for help from his own people, their own medic. The irony wasn't lost on Eva, even in the middle of combat. She dropped the empty magazine and slammed in her second. 11 rounds left in this magazine. One more magazine after that. 19 rounds total against 5 remaining fighters who were still coming. The remaining 5 pressed forward. They'd seen 3 of their teammates go down, and they were still advancing. Either bravery or stupidity, or orders so firm they couldn't be ignored. One of them saw the rebar tripwire, the improvised obstacle she'd created. His eyes widened, and he tried to warn the man behind him. Too late. The second fighter caught the steel bar full stride. His shin hit the rebar with a sound like a baseball bat hitting a tree. He went face first onto the deck with an impact that probably broke his nose and definitely knocked him senseless. His rifle skittered away across the steel grating. Ava put a round through the rifle's receiver, destroying it completely, rendering it inoperable even if he recovered it. Then she turned to the next target. The man who'd spotted the tripwire was aiming directly at her. Point-blank range, maybe 8 meters. She could see his finger tightening on the trigger, see the determination in his eyes. She fired first. The round hit his rifle's handguard, and the weapon jumped out of his grip like it had been yanked by an invisible hand. The rifle clattered to the deck between them. He stared at his empty hands with the disbelief of a man who'd just been disarmed by a woman with a pistol at close range. "Down," Eva commanded, her voice carrying command authority she'd learned from a decade in uniform. "Face down, hands behind your head, now!" He dropped. Smart man. He'd survived the night because he'd made the intelligent choice. Behind her, Flint's rifle cracked steadily from the western position. Measured shots spaced 3 seconds apart. He was holding the line with one hand and borrowed courage and determination that came from knowing his daughter needed him alive. The 3 remaining Eastern fighters pulled back, dragged their wounded with them in proper casualty evacuation drill, disappeared behind concrete barriers 50 meters down the road. Eva checked her magazine. 4 rounds remaining, 1 full magazine left. 45 rounds had become 19. She looked at her watch. 04:07 hours, 31 minutes. From the western tree line, Kessler's voice carried through the fog one more time. No loudspeaker, no amplification, just a man's voice. Raw with something Eva hadn't heard from him before. Frustration, anger, the sound of a professional soldier watching his plans fail against impossible odds. "You know this ends the same way, Ghost. 31 minutes or 31 hours. The math hasn't changed. You can't win. You can only delay." Eva didn't answer with words. She picked up the rifle from the man she'd disarmed. An AR-15 variant with a full magazine. She checked the action with practiced hands. Clean, functional, 30 rounds. Providence or luck, or maybe something else. She'd take any of them. She crawled back to Flint's position, moving low and fast. "You okay?" Flint was breathing hard. His hands were shaking, but his eyes were clear despite the pain and blood loss. "I shot someone, in the leg." I watched him go down, watched him scream. "You saved lives. That's what you did. You kept them from flanking us. You held the line." "It doesn't feel like saving. It feels like hurting." "It never does. Not at first. Not for good people. But that man you shot, he'll go home, see his family, live his life. That's more than he'd get if this bridge had been defended by someone who shot to kill." She crawled to Grady, checked his pulse. Still there, fading, like a candle flickering in wind, about to go out. 31 minutes, she told him. His lips moved. No sound came out, but she could read them anyway. Cornbread. Eva almost broke. Almost let the tears she'd been holding for 6 hours finally fall. Almost let the grief and exhaustion and fear overwhelm her. Almost. She pressed her forehead against Grady's cold hand for 2 seconds. Just 2. A moment of human connection before returning to the machine she needed to be to keep them alive. Then she stood and walked back to her position. 31 minutes, 49 rounds total. 2 wounded who might not survive even if the Apaches arrived on schedule. 1 dead kid under a silver blanket who would haunt her dreams for whatever remained of her life. And the man in the tree line who wasn't going to stop until he'd taken her bridge, or she'd taken everything he had. Eva settled behind the captured rifle and found the tree line in its iron sights and waited for the final act. Kessler sent everyone at 04:17 hours, not in waves, not in phases, not with the tactical patience he'd shown all night, not with the professional restraint of someone preserving forces for future operations. He sent every fighter he had left, 26 men from the western tree line, 8 from the ridge line who'd been providing overwatch, the remnants of the eastern team regrouping for another push, all converging simultaneously from every direction that physics in desperation allowed. Eva heard them before she saw them. Boots. Dozens of boots. Hammering pavement, crunching gravel, pounding through underbrush. The sound of a commander who had run out of clever ideas and was betting everything on one brutal, overwhelming charge. "Here they come," Flint shouted from his position. His voice cracked on the last word, not from fear, but from the strain of a body that had been bleeding for 6 hours, that was running on empty, that should have been unconscious, but was kept functional by sheer will. "West side! I count at least 20 on the road, maybe more in the tree line." "East side," Eva called back, her voice steady despite everything. "5 coming back, same fighters. They've got fresh weapons from their wounded." Eva's mind became a machine. Inputs, outputs, priorities, no emotion, no fear, just calculation. Western approach. 20-plus fighters, but they couldn't cross the 40-foot gap without using the cables again. They'd provide covering fire for the eastern assault. Threat level, suppression, not direct assault. Eastern approach. 5 fighters with fresh weapons coming straight up the only intact section of bridge. This was the kill move. Everything else was supporting action. Ridge. 8 shooters with elevated positions. They'd rain fire down to pin her, while the eastern team closed in for the kill. Flint. Western suppression. Keep their heads down. Don't waste rounds. Just make noise. Copy. Eva grabbed the captured AR-15 and sprinted to the center of the bridge. The point where she could pivot between supporting either position. The point where she'd made her stand all night. She dropped prone and found the eastern road through the iron sights. The ridge shooters opened first. Rounds punched into the deck around her in a ragged pattern, accurate enough to be dangerous, inaccurate enough to tell her they were firing downhill in fog at a prone target with poor visibility. She pressed flat and let the steel I-beams do their job. Flint's rifle barked from the west. 3 shots. 4. He was firing deliberately, placing each round to remind the western force that advancing meant dying. A scream echoed across the gap. Someone had tried the cable crossing. Someone had caught a round. The eastern team charged, 5 men sprinting, their boots hammering on asphalt. The point man had learned about the tripwire from watching his teammates fall. He hurdled it cleanly, his form suggesting military training and athletic ability. The second man followed. The third caught it with his trailing foot and stumbled but recovered, his forward momentum carrying him through. Eva picked up the slack. The captured AR-15 felt wrong in her hands. Different weight distribution, different balance, different trigger pull than her M4. She adjusted in a fraction of a second and put her first round through the second man's kneecap. He dropped instantly, screaming, clutching his leg. The sound of a man who just had his mobility destroyed. The third man raised his weapon toward Flint's position. Eva shifted and fired twice. The first round destroyed the man's rifle stock, the wood exploding into splinters. The second hit his right bicep, the impact spinning him sideways. His arm went limp. The rifle clattered to the deck. 3 down in 4 seconds. 2 still coming. The fourth fighter was fast, faster than anyone she'd engaged all night. He closed to within 10 meters of Flint's position before Eva could track him properly. Flint fired point blank with his borrowed rifle. Missed. The angle was wrong, and he was shooting left-handed, and the pain was making it hard to focus. The man dove and rolled behind a pylon, now inside their defensive perimeter, now where he could flank them and fire from an angle the obstacles couldn't protect against. "Flint, he's behind your 2 o'clock pylon." "I know. I can hear him moving." The fighter popped out from cover and leveled his weapon at Flint. Flint was pinned, lying flat with a tourniquet on his leg and one functional hand, unable to roll or crawl fast enough to avoid a point-blank shot. Eva pulled the trigger. The round hit the fighter's weapon at the magazine well. The rifle split apart in his hands, the magazine separating from the receiver, rounds spilling onto the deck like metallic rain. Fragments of aluminum and steel peppered his face. He screamed and staggered backward, clutching his eyes where metal fragments had embedded. Flint grabbed the man's ankle with his good hand and pulled. The fighter hit the deck hard. Before he could rise, Flint threw his left arm across the man's throat in a chokehold, pinning him with his body weight despite the tourniquet and the blood loss and the pain. "I got him, Thorne. I got him." The fifth fighter saw his teammate pinned and hesitated. 1 second of indecision, 1 moment of uncertainty. Eva put a round into the deck at his feet. He turned and ran. The eastern assault collapsed, but the western fire intensified. Rounds poured across the gap, not aim shots, but volume. Sheets of lead designed to suppress everything on the bridge, to keep them pinned while Kessler decided what to do next. Flint fired back, slower now, his movements sluggish. The tourniquet on his thigh was holding, but blood loss was stealing his consciousness, one red cell at a time. "Flint, talk to me." "Still here." His voice was a whisper. "Magazine's almost out." "How many rounds?" "3, maybe 4. Can't see clearly enough to count." Eva did the math. The captured AR-15 had 11 rounds remaining. Her Beretta had 19. Flint had 4 at most. 34 rounds total against an unknown number of remaining fighters. She checked her watch. 04:21 hours. 17 minutes. 17 minutes and the sky would fill with Apaches, and this nightmare would end. 17 minutes and Grady would get his surgeon, and Flint would get his blood transfusion, and they would all get to leave this bridge alive. 17 minutes. Then she heard the boots land on the eastern deck. 2 distinct impacts, one after another, heavy, purposeful. 2 fighters had crossed the western cables while the suppressive fire kept her attention divided. They were behind her, again, inside the perimeter. Eva rolled and saw them, 2 men, armed, standing on the deck between her and her wounded, between her and Grady's stretcher, between her and Walker's body under the silver blanket. One of them looked down at Walker, at the silver blanket covering a 19-year-old kid from Ohio, and kicked the blanket aside. He said something to his partner, words Eva couldn't hear over the gunfire, something casual, something dismissive, and both men laughed. Something inside Evangeline Thorne detonated. Not her training, not her discipline, not her medic's oath or her SEAL conditioning, or any of the things that made her who she was. Something deeper, something primal, something that existed before civilization taught humans to control their rage. She didn't aim for legs. She didn't aim for shoulders. She didn't aim for weapons. She aimed center mass on the man who'd kicked Walker's blanket, put her crosshairs on his heart, and her finger found the trigger. And for the first time in 3 years, the ghost of Ramadi came roaring back to life. The shot was perfect. Range 7 meters, target stationary, no wind, clear sight picture. She'd made this shot 10,000 times, could make it in her sleep, could make it with her eyes closed. Her finger tightened, 1 millimeter from breaking the shot, 1 millimeter from becoming the woman she'd sworn she'd never be again. And stopped. her finger froze. Because in that fraction of a second, she saw not the man who'd laughed at Walker's death, but the boy in Ramadi, saw the boy's face superimposed over the fighters, saw what would happen after the trigger break, saw the body falling, saw the blood, saw another ghost that would follow her forever. Not again, never again. She dropped her aim 2 feet and fired. The round shattered the fighter's shin, not his chest, his shin. The tibia exploding into fragments, the man's leg collapsing under him. He dropped, screaming, clutching his destroyed leg. His partner spun toward her and she hit him in the thigh. A through and through that severed muscle, but missed the femoral artery. He went down hard, hitting the deck face first. Both down, both alive, both screaming. Eva's hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the rifle. Not from fatigue, not from adrenaline, from what she'd almost done. From how close she'd come to breaking the promise that kept her human. "Thorn!" Flint called. "You okay?" "I'm fine." She wasn't fine. She was as far from fine as a person could be. But fine was the only word she had because admitting the truth meant acknowledging that she'd almost murdered someone in cold blood. Almost let rage override every principle she'd built her new identity on. The suppressive fire from the west began to taper, sporadic now, uncertain. Kessler's fighters were running low on ammunition. They'd been firing continuously for almost 8 minutes, burning through magazines at a rate even well-supplied units couldn't sustain indefinitely. Then Flint's voice, weak but urgent. "Thorn, something's happening. West side." She crawled to his position. Flint was pointing west with a trembling hand. Through the fog, she could see movement in the tree line. Not advancing, retreating. Men pulling back. Vehicles starting engines. The organized, rapid withdrawal of a force that had just received information it didn't want. "They're leaving," Flint said. "Why are they leaving? We didn't beat them. We just survived. Why would they withdraw now?" And then Eva heard it. Distant, but unmistakable. Growing louder with every second. A sound that made her chest tight with relief. Rotors. Not the light flutter of a drone or the civilian thump of a news helicopter. This was the deep, percussive thunder of military attack helicopters. Twin-engine, rotor-driven fury that shook the air and turned fog into swirling vortexes of displaced moisture. "Warhammer 6, Eva whispered. "They came early. They're early." 2 AH-64 Apache gunships crested the eastern ridge in attack formation. Nose down, stub wings bristling with weapons pods, their forward-looking infrared systems painting the battlefield in thermal images. Their 30mm M230 chain guns rotating toward the western tree line with mechanical precision. The lead Apache banked hard over the bridge, its searchlight cutting through the fog like white-hot surgical blades. The rotor wash hit Eva like a warm hurricane, whipping her hair, pressing her uniform against her body. The loudspeaker on the Apache boomed across the gorge, amplified to overwhelming volume. "All armed personnel, drop your weapons and lie face down. You have 10 seconds to comply. This is your only warning. Failure to comply will result in engagement." The tree line erupted, not with gunfire but with movement. Men throwing down rifles, men running, men dropping flat with their hands behind their heads in the universal posture of surrender. Colonel Vance Kessler's Sovereign Patriot Brigade, 43 fighters at the start of the night, now reduced, defeated, disarmed, disintegrated in 10 seconds by the arrival of overwhelming force. The second Apache orbited the ridgeline, its searchlights sweeping the elevated positions. The 8 ridge shooters threw their weapons off the cliff and surrendered where they stood. Behind the Apaches, a UH-60 Blackhawk, the medevac bird, red crosses visible on its flanks even through the fog, descended toward the eastern span with the delicate precision of an experienced combat pilot. The rotor wash hit the bridge like a storm. Eva shielded her eyes and watched the bird settle onto the fractured deck with its main gear, the pilot threading the needle between damaged sections and intact steel. The crew chief jumped out before the wheels fully touched down. Two flight medics followed, carrying trauma kits that made Eva's depleted med bag look like a child's toy. A flight surgeon in full gear. "How many casualties?" the surgeon shouted over the rotors. "Two surviving wounded, one KIA. Eva's voice was steady, professional, the voice of a combat medic delivering a field report despite everything. "Sergeant Grady, penetrating chest trauma, hemothorax, hemorrhagic shock stage 4, approximately 7 hours since injury. Corporal Flint, arterial bleed, right thigh. Tourniquet applied approximately 1 hour ago. Additional wounds, right hand and left shoulder, both critical, both need immediate surgical intervention." The surgeon's eyes widened slightly at the precision of the report, at the calm delivery despite the blood and chaos. But he didn't waste time being impressed. "Get Grady on first, he's priority 1. The medevac crew loaded Grady onto a litter with practiced efficiency. As they lifted him, his eyes opened one last time, focused on Eva through the pain and blood loss in failing systems. His lips moved. She leaned close. "It's not Tuesday anymore," he whispered. "It's Wednesday. Tell Sarah, I made it to Wednesday." Eva squeezed his hand. "Tell her yourself, you've got cornbread to eat." They loaded Flint next. He grabbed Eva's wrist as they carried him past, his grip weak but determined. "Lily's birthday, you're invited. Cake has a horse on it." "Mr. Trotters." Flint's eyes filled with tears. "You remembered." "I remember everything, Flint. Every word, every promise. Now go get fixed so you can say goodnight properly." The Black Hawk lifted off, rotors beating the air into submission. The Apaches maintained overwatch, circling like predatory birds. The fog was thinning. The first pale light of dawn, 0618 hours right on schedule, crept over the eastern ridge and painted the steel trusses in gold and shadow. Eva stood alone on the bridge. She walked to where Walker lay beneath a silver blanket, knelt beside him, placed one hand on the blanket and closed her eyes. "I'm sorry, Casey. I'm sorry I couldn't buy you enough time. I'm sorry your mom won't see you come home. I'm sorry you'll never know if joining up was the right choice." She stayed there for 10 seconds, then opened her eyes. "But I can tell you this. You died protecting people. You died holding a bridge that mattered. You died believing I was someone worth believing in. That's not nothing. That's everything." She stood. A second Black Hawk descended, this one carrying additional personnel. The bird touched down, and before the rotors even began to spin down, a figure jumped out. Colonel August Blackwell. He was older than Eva remembered, 68 now, gray hair thinned at the crown, lines etched deep around his eyes from 3 decades of command and combat. But he moved with the same bearing that had made him a legend at Fort Bragg, the same presence that made soldiers stand straighter when he entered a room. He walked across the fractured deck slowly, taking in everything: the bullet holes, the mortar craters, the blood trails, the 40-foot gap where steel used to be, the abandoned weapons scattered across the deck like fallen leaves. And standing in the middle of it all, one woman, blonde hair matted with sweat and blood, medic patch on one shoulder, exhausted blue eyes that held 7 hours of war in 3 years of ghosts. When he reached her, he stopped 10 feet away. "You held it," he said quietly. Not a question, a statement of fact tinged with something that might have been awe. One medic against 43 of Kessler's best, and you held the bridge. Eva looked at him, at the man who'd trained her to kill, who'd made her into the ghost of Ramadi, who'd created the weapon she'd spent 3 years trying to stop being. "One of your men. When he crossed the cable, he found my soldier, the one who died. Casey Walker, 19 years old, from Ohio, and your man kicked his blanket off and laughed." Blackwell's face went pale. "I want you to know something, Colonel. I had my sights on him. Center mass, perfect shot. Could have killed him without thinking. Almost did. She paused. And I chose not to, because Casey died believing I was better than revenge. Better than killing. And I wasn't going to make him wrong. Blackwell said nothing. You asked me once if I knew what it meant to hold a bridge. I'll tell you now. Holding a bridge means standing between the living and the dead and choosing every second with every round through every hour of the longest night of your life to add to the living instead of the dead. She stepped closer. Your 43 men are alive, Colonel Kessler. All of them. Wounded, broken, defeated, but alive. Because I held this bridge the way it should be held. Without hatred, without revenge, without becoming the weapon you made me. Blackwell looked at her for a long moment. Then he did something Eva didn't expect. He pulled her into an embrace. And for the first time since Ramadi, since the boy in the dust, since the night she'd sworn never to kill again, Evangeline Thorne broke down. Not crying, not quite, but something inside her chest finally loosened. The thing that had been holding her together through sheer force of will for 7 hours. The thing that had kept her standing when every part of her wanted to fall. Blackwell held her until she pulled away. Then he stepped back. I trained you to be a killer, he said quietly. The best I ever made. Taught you every technique, every tactic, every trick that makes special operations soldiers the deadliest humans on Earth. And you know what you proved? That the woman I trained to kill grew into the soldier I should have been. That mercy isn't weakness. That the hardest fight isn't the one where you take lives. It's the one where you save them. A voice called from the eastern approach. Colonel Blackwell, we've secured Colonel Kessler. 2 MPs were bringing Kessler forward, hands zip-tied behind his back, face haggard, the face of a man who'd spent all night watching his plans fail, eyes searching until they found Eva. Blackwell gestured and the MPs brought him close. Kessler looked at Eva, then at Blackwell standing beside her, then back at Eva. You made her soft, Ironside, Kessler said. His voice was hoarse but defiant. The ghost would have ended this in 10 minutes. 6 shots. I'd be dead, and this would be over. The ghost was a killer I created because I didn't know better, Blackwell replied. Evangeline Thorne is the soldier she chose to become despite me. Eva stepped forward, faced Kessler directly. You wanted me to prove you right. That mercy is weakness. That Blackwell ruined me. That I'm just a nurse who can't handle real combat. Kessler's jaw tightened. 41 of your men are alive right now because of mercy. They'll go home, see families, live lives. Casey Walker's dead. I'll carry him forever. But you'll carry 41 ghosts you don't have because the nurse you mocked fought harder than any killer. She paused. You lose, Colonel, because you'll spend the rest of your life in prison knowing a woman with a medic patch beat your entire brigade without killing a single one of you. Kessler had no response. The insult that actually landed. The defeat that meant something beyond tactics and casualties. The MPs led him away. Eva watched him go, then turned to Blackwell. Tell me about Walker, Blackwell said softly. 19, from Ohio. First deployment, never fired at a person before tonight. What did he do? How did he fight? He became a spotter for Flint when Flint lost his dominant hand. He called targets. He kept Flint oriented. And at the end, when a fighter got inside our perimeter, Walker told me exactly where he was so I could engage. He died doing his job. He learned from the best. I couldn't save him, Colonel. I tried everything. CPR for 5 minutes. But the blood loss, the shock, it was too much. No, but you honored him. Every fighter you didn't kill tonight, that's Walker's legacy. He died believing you were better than killing. You proved him right. The sun was fully up now, burning gold across Ravenlock Bridge, turning the fog to mist, painting the broken steel in light that made it look almost beautiful. Eva looked at the bridge, at the gap she'd blown, at the deck she'd defended, at the place where Casey Walker died and Grady fought for breath, and Flint lost blood, and she'd stood against impossible odds. They sneered at me, she said quietly, called me just a nurse, said medics don't fight. Blackwell put a hand on her shoulder. You're right, medics don't fight. They fight harder, to keep everyone alive, even the enemy. That's not weakness, Evangeline. That's the war that actually matters, the only one worth winning. Eva picked up Walker's dog tags from beneath the blanket, closed her fist around them. Medics don't fight, she whispered. We fight the hardest war there is, the one where winning means everyone goes home, even the people trying to kill you. That's the oath I swore. That's the bridge I'll always hold. She looked at Blackwell, at the man who'd trained her to kill and was now learning from her how to save. Thank you, Colonel, for believing I could be more than a weapon. No, Evangeline, thank you for teaching an old soldier that mercy isn't weakness. It's courage I never had. The final transport helicopter arrived. Time to leave. Time to let the engineers assess the damage and the investigation begin. But Eva stood there for one more moment, looking at the bridge that had held through everything, the steel that had absorbed bullets and mortars, and the weight of impossible choices. She thought about Casey Walker and Lily's birthday cake, and Sunday cornbread, and bad shower singing. And she knew, with the certainty of someone who'd been tested in fire and hadn't broken, that she'd made the right choice. Every single time. The helicopter lifted off. Ravenlock Bridge fell away beneath them, broken, scarred, still standing. And the fog finally lifted completely, revealing what had always been there beneath it. Not a ghost story, not a legend, not a myth about a sniper who couldn't be killed. A truth, that the hardest fight isn't the one where you take lives. It's the one where you save them, where every bullet is a choice, and every choice is a prayer, and every prayer is answered not by killing, but by the stubborn, ferocious, unbreakable refusal to let death win. Medics don't fight. They fight the hardest war there is, the war to keep everyone alive, even the enemy. And on Ravenlock Bridge, on the longest night in the Appalachian Mountains, one woman proved that strength isn't measured by the bodies you leave behind. It's measured by the lives you carry forward. Every single one.